For many citizens of African countries, paying bribes to officials for simple services like passports or driving licenses is all too common. Many even need to pay bribes just to file a complaint with the police. In fact, our research shows that 1 in 4 African citizens are forced to pay bribes for these and many other basic services, including life-saving medicines and healthcare. Over the last 2 years, more than 47,000 citizens from 35 African countries shared their everyday experiences of corruption with us. What did they say? Well, more than half of citizens think corruption is getting worse in their country, and their government is doing a bad job in tackling it. Corruption, though, doesn't affect everyone equally. The poorest in society are twice as likely to pay bribes than the wealthiest. And young people are more likely to pay bribes than older people. But corruption and bribery in Africa don't exist in a vacuum. Foreign governments and companies have a role to play, ensuring that cases, bribery, and money laundering in African countries are investigated and punished. The good news? A majority of people are optimistic they can still make a real difference in the fight against corruption. Learn more about the 2019 Global Corruption Barometer for Africa at www.transparency.org/GCB10/Africa.
Big corruption scandals involving companies like Airbus, Ericsson, or Odebrecht have dominated the headlines in recent years. These aren't the first private companies making millions in profits abroad, thanks to their ability to offer bribes and lucrative business deals. Unfortunately, it's all too common for businesses in wealthy countries to export corruption.
What I don't understand is
no country is immune.
The link.
Countries receiving foreign bribes often pay higher prices than they otherwise would for lower quality goods and services. Spending taxpayer money on unnecessary contracts wastes millions of dollars that could otherwise go towards essential and often life-saving services, healthcare, and education. Foreign bribery damages the reputation of the affected country, and the trust in its government, which once lost, is hard to rebuild. According to our latest exporting corruption report, nearly half of world exports come from countries that fail to punish foreign bribery. Countries must do more to stop foreign bribery, especially those that are the biggest traders but the worst enforcers of the rules. Learn more. www.transparency.org.
For many citizens of African countries, paying bribes to officials for simple services like passports or driving licenses is all too common. Many even need to pay bribes just to file a complaint with the police. In fact, our research shows that 1 in 4 African citizens are forced to pay bribes for these and many other basic services, including life-saving medicines and healthcare. Over the last 2 years, more than 47,000 citizens from 35 African countries shared their everyday experiences of corruption with us. What did they say? Well, more than half of citizens think corruption is getting worse in their country, and their government is doing a bad job in tackling it. Corruption, though, doesn't affect everyone equally. The poorest in society are twice as likely to pay bribes than the wealthiest, and young people are more likely to pay bribes than older people. But corruption and bribery in Africa don't exist in a vacuum. Foreign governments and companies have a role to play, ensuring that cases, bribery, and money laundering in African countries are investigated and punished. The good news? A majority of people are optimistic they can still make a real difference in the fight against corruption. Learn more about the 2019 Global Corruption Barometer for Africa at www.transparency.org/GCB10/Africa.
Big corruption scandals involving companies like Airbus, Ericsson, or Odebrecht.
According to in Nigeria, could cost up to 37% of gross domestic products (GDP) by 2030 if it is not dealt with immediately. This cost is equated to around $1,000 per person in 2014 and nearly $2,000 per person by 2030. The effect of this loss is felt throughout the country, from the private sector, defense and security, education and health, to mention a few, therefore making the country vulnerable to minor and significant shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to corruption, Nigeria's entrepreneurs and businesses suffer some of the highest cost of operation in Africa, resulting in stagnating and receding economic and developmental progress. Although the opportunities for growth and development in Nigeria and across Africa abound, the future of Nigeria as a stable, prosperous nation remains very uncertain due to the extreme levels of corruption in the public and private sectors. This is why the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in collaboration with Center for International Private Enterprise, is hosting the first Africa Business Ethics Conference to hold in Nigeria, providing a platform for insightful and constructive deliberations about tackling corruption in Nigeria and in Africa as a continent. The theme for ABEC Nigeria 2020 is tackling corruption to reduce poverty, unemployment, and insecurity. This presentation is orchestrated to interrogate the manifestation and impact of corruption in the following spheres of the Nigerian economy. 1. What really is the cost of corruption to you as an individual and to your business? 2. What is the cost of corruption in the informal and underbanked sector? And 3. What really is the cost of corruption on security, peace, and freedom? From a survey on MSMEs and businesses in Lagos, Kano, and Aba, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry found that 76% of MSMEs said they paid a bribe to a government official in the past few months. Processing consistency and lack of transparency in regulatory agencies increases cost of processing official requirement by between 5 to 50%. Little wonder Kofi Annan once said, "If corruption is a disease, transparency is a central part of its treatment." Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the topics for our plenary and breakout sessions for day 1 shall cover the following issues. A. Tackling corruption in the maritime industry. B. Transparency and accountability in public procurement and spending. And C. The supply side of corruption, prioritizing ethics and integrity in business culture.
Seeing is believing. When you are supposed to get something out in time and you are not getting it, and at the end of the day, when money exchange hands, you get it out. I mean, you have to weigh your options.
We are on the verge of completing registration with a government agency in Nigeria here. And
reaching you live from the beautiful city of Lagos, the commercial center of Nigeria, I say a big welcome to all of you For those of you gathered here live with me at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industries headquarters here in Lagos, and of course, the numerous others watching us online from all over the globe, I say a big welcome to you all to the day 2 of Africa Business Ethics Conference, APEC 2020, organized, of course, by the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE. Wow, what a day it was yesterday. Yesterday's event, for those of you who might just be joining us for the very first time, we say a lot is installed for today, but you still missed a lot yesterday. Yesterday's event was lovely, and we can't start today's event without quickly doing a special thank you and shout out to all the wonderful VIPs that spoke yesterday, including the wonderful welcome address from our chief host, the current president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in person of Madam Toki Mabogunje, who gave a wonderful welcome address. And we're not forgetting also the passionate delivery from the representative of His Excellency Professor Benedict Orama, the president of Afrexim Bank, who was ably represented by Mr. Idrissa Diop, the director of compliance of Afrexim Bank. And we are also saying a special thank you to Mr. Patrick Obat, the chairman of board, Standard Chartered Bank, who gave a very passionate delivery, and he's someone that has been known as a champion when it comes to proper ethic practice within the workspace environment. And also, we're not forgetting another beautiful delivery that we got from Mr. Andrew Wilson, the executive director for the Center of International Private Enterprise, SIPE, who also gave us that wonderful delivery yesterday. Now, today's event is not going to be any different, as I did mention. It's fully packed. A lot is lined up for today. And even much later, we're going to be having 3 breakout sessions that will be moderated simultaneously. One here and the other 2 will be going on virtually. And I will be reading out the instruction as to how you can be part of these various sessions as they happen. Once more, I'm going to be your host today again. My name is William Suzamba. I'm a media consultant with Connect Nigeria, and we promise to bring you the very best for the Day 2's event of the APEC 2020 happening live here in the city of Lagos at the LCCI premises, and of course virtually. Everybody's tuned in from the various parts of the globe to be part of this event. Right about now, we shall be going to the second part of the 3-part video that I did mention yesterday that we're going to be watching. And this part 2 of the video is titled Cost of Corruption. So ladies and gentlemen, please pay your undivided attention as we shall be playing this very unique video that will set the ball rolling for today's event. Please watch.
Big corruption scandals involving companies like Airbus, Ericsson, or Odebrecht have dominated the headlines in recent years. These aren't the first private companies making millions. Big corruption scandals involving companies like Airbus, Ericsson, or Odebrecht have dominated the headlines in recent years. These aren't the first private companies making millions in profits abroad, thanks to their ability to offer bribes in exchange for lucrative business deals. Unfortunately, it's all too common for businesses in wealthy countries to export corruption to poorer countries. And no
Your Excellencies and Captains of Industry, welcome to Day 2 of Africa Business Ethics Conference 2020. Our topics planned in the America section for 2 shall cover the following issues: the menace of corruption on the engine of growth in Africa, empowering the media and promoting press freedom, tackle corruption, and strengthen accountability in Nigeria, harnessing technology to mitigate corruption and to maximize public policy for public good. Before we start, let's ask, what is the cost of corruption to consumers?
I think there are different angles we can look at. Let's look at it from a study point of view. MIT did a study some years ago, and even though it was an international study, I think Nigeria applies as well. And that study showed that consumers like you or myself are willing to pay up to about 10% higher for goods that we are sure of the supply chain, we are sure has no corrupt influence, we are sure that has an authentic chain all the way through that no one has tampered with. So on the surface, the first point is that when we know there's no corruption, we know that consumers want to pay more.
Level and the stage at which it has become systemic is principally fueled by the public sector, not just politicians but civil servants. And in the country, with the level of poverty we have, anybody that makes money is celebrated, and nobody cares about how the money is made. So it elevates corruption to the level of if I may use the word in inverted commas, an endorsed process for making money. So there is no level playing field for young graduates to go into honest business.
The situation is that it's either you take it or you leave it. And the moment you start mentioning their names in the press, they start running back to ask, you should have called us. Why do we have to? Are we not paying for these services? We don't have to. And as industrialists, we need to be encouraged, because there are a lot of frustration when it comes to manufacturing. Apart from frustration that is eating you up, there's financial loss.
Our cost of financing is extremely high. We do not have access to credit. And if you put that in the context of a country that's importing probably about 300,000 to 400,000 vehicles, and these are the used vehicles, it then helps you put into perspective the problem we're dealing with. We only import maybe about 10 to 20,000 new vehicles. So that tells you that we can't afford the new vehicles. If revenues are low, if incomes are low, the natural tendency is to go for a cheaper car. If you've got porous borders, if you've got officials who are either delaying your car at the ports and it's accruing demurrage, or you have to wait for ages before you can clear the car, then you've got another set of waits, for you to then license the car. Then you find that people will, and we don't support it, but people will try and cut corners. And cutting corners will include, misregistering their vehicles so that they pay a lower amount. But it also extends to things like we ourselves as a country need to be honest and true to ourselves. Benin Republic, in the same year that the auto bill was launched in Nigeria, which took customs duty rate from about 22% to 70% in some instances.
Thank you very much for that video. Now, at this point in the program, before we progress to the day's agenda proper, I would like to observe all the necessary protocol and acknowledge both the presence of some of our dignitaries and the ones that are still on their way, including the ones that probably will be joining us online. Now, first on my list is Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, who's the special advisor to the president on the ease of doing business. We say welcome, madam. We have Professor Aduku Armstrong Augustine Idachaba, the Director General of the Nigerian Broadcasting Commission. He is also here with us with Dr. Vincent Chibuike Ogunke, who is the Zonal Director NBC Lagos Zonal Office. Also recognizing Professor Bolaji Owasanoye San, who's the chairman of Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC, who is ably represented by Miss Azuka Ogugwa, acting head of public enlightenment at ICPC. Such an event of this nature cannot be complete without having ICPC present in our midst. So we say thank you for being in our midst. Also having in our midst Mrs. Omowumi Badamosi, who is the country director, SIPE, Nigeria. She's going to be with us. Also on this protocol list is Mr. Maman Ahmed, Director General of the Bureau of Public Procurement, BPP, ably represented by Mr. Aliyu Odogi Aliyu, Head Regulation and Database, Federal Bureau of Public Procurement, BPP. We're also going to be having Professor Kingsley Mogalu, Professor of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, Massachusetts, former Deputy Governor, Central Bank of Nigeria, a very notable figure. We're also having Otumba Abimbola Ogubanjo, President of the National Council of Nigerian Stock Exchange. We're also going to be having Mr. Agada B. Abuchi, MD CEO of Unified Payment Services Limited. Also, another notable individual, Dr. Ayotunde Koka, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, RAC Center. We're also going to be having Prince Degun Agboade, President and Chairman of Council, National Association of Small and Medium Enterprise, NASME. And another notable individual we're going to be having in our midst, Miss Agatha Amata, the MD, Chief Executive Officer, Inside Out Media, owners of Rave TV and Trend FM. And of course, we're having in our midst our notable Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in person of Dr. Muda Yusuf, who's already very much in our presence. We say welcome, sir. And amongst the VIP expected today is Mr. Peter Bankole, Director, Enterprise Development Center at Lagos Business School. We say a big welcome to all these notable individuals that will be gracing our occasion today, and the many others that will be joining us once more. And here's a quick reminder too that we're still going to be expecting the presence of His Excellency Professor Yemi Osibanjo, GCON, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, at tomorrow's event. So we still look forward to him giving us his own side of the event as a whole. Now, moving along to today's program proper. At this point in time, I did mention yesterday that we're going to be starting today's event with the plenary Q&A session. And we did mention that we should send in all the various questions and get ready to have two notable individuals to engage the general audience in a Q&A plenary session. And they'll be discussing this topic on the subject matter, the organized business community's role in combating corruption and the need for government reforms to reduce corruption in Nigeria. Now, the two individuals that will be helping us to dissect this subject matter based on the Q&A and plenary session is no other person than Miss Omowumi Badamosi, the country director of SIPE. I want to believe Madam is here with us. Okay, she'll be joining us shortly on stage. And to be supporting Madam on this session is Mr. Muda Yusuf, the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who's already here with us. So, sir, please come on stage, please. Please, a round of applause as Dr. Muda Yusuf comes on stage. Beautiful. I've just been rightly informed that Ms. Badamosi is online with us. So I'll be handing the mic over to Dr. Muda Yusuf, and he will take it up from there.
Thank you very much, our able MC. Just as our MC said, we'll be focusing on the theme organized business community role in combating corruption and the need for government reforms to reduce corruption. First, let me say that this particular topic is a very, very important one, having regard to the challenges that businesses face in the Nigerian economy, and I guess in many countries in Africa. We have an environment in which those who do businesses ethically face a whole lot of challenges because the system penalizes them. And we have a system that seems to reward those who engage in unethical business practices. That is a very, very unfortunate situation, and it puts a lot of pressure on businesses that are doing things ethically, that are complying with the rules and all of that. And this condition is much more profound in sectors where competition is very intense, in sectors where barriers to entry is very low. So we have all sorts of malpractices that puts businesses, compliant businesses, under a lot of pressure. And another manifestation or consequence of this condition is the growing size of the informal sector. Because the more difficult it becomes to be ethical, to be compliant, the lesser the number of players in the formal sector, and the more we lose people to the informal sector, where the level of compliance is generally low, where unethical practices are very common, and all of that. These are issues we face. And the variance, if I may quickly just go through the variance of corruption from the private sector perspective. We are not talking about corruption with public sector now. We are talking about corruption within the private sector. First, corruption around issues of trade malpractices. We have various issues around smuggling, for instance, where people evade duty. We have issues around product counterfeiting and faking, issues of piracy, under-invoicing, and all of that. All of these situations create a condition of unfair competition, which of course is not good for the development of the private sector. Then we have issues around procurement, contract inflation, compromising due process. Sometimes when we have issues of corruption in the public sector, where we talk about contract inflation and all of that, a lot of these things happen in collusion with the private sector. So for most of the corruption practices that take place in the public sector, there are always a private sector, accomplice that makes these things happen. And of course, there are also issues around policy and regulation. This is also very key. We have seen the prevalence sometimes of what we call regulatory capture, where businesses sometimes, because of influence the direction of policy, not for the common good, but just for the personal benefits of a particular company, of particular individual. These things create a whole lot of problem in the regulatory space. And once you have that, you have a situation where the playing field is not level and all of that. We also have something related to that, which you can call the policy capture, where we have a few very strong people also influence policy to benefit just their company, not to benefit the entire private sector space. So these are the variants of corruption that we deal with in the private sector. And of course, there is a role that the OPS needs to play. There are reforms that we need to ensure takes place. I will come to that, but I will stop here and allow Mrs. Gbadamosi to share her perspective before I now go on to say something about what the role of the organized businesses should be and the kind of reforms that we think the government should put in place to put an end to this challenge of corruption. So I invite Mrs. Gbadamosi to please take over from here.
Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, SIPE has supported LCCI in recent times. We heard yesterday from the executive director of SIPE that SIPE has been working in Nigeria since 1988. That's a long time. And its partners have been the private sector, the business community. In recent time, to complement concerted efforts by different stakeholders, SIPE has supported LCCI to lead the private sector to push reform to achieve the much needed efficiency, for example, and productivity within the Nigerian maritime ports. Also, in consideration of the fact that the quality of regulatory governance is critical for investment to thrive in the Nigerian economy, SIPE also provided support to LCCI to conduct a survey poll as well as field survey in order to estimate the transactional cost of corruption to MSMEs in Nigeria as a result of interactions with regulatory agencies and MDAs. NAFDAC and FIRS were among the most mentioned by respondents. At fora to discuss key findings of initial reports and obtain the necessary responses to develop final report, including recommendations with respect to the two agencies, business was indicted by the two regulatory agencies. And that is instructive. Corruption has two sides to it. There is the demand side of corruption and there is the supply side. It's easy to point a finger at the public sector, but where do the other four fingers point? What is the fight against corruption really is a fight we must win. And it takes the two sides of the divide to be resolute about it. Business as actors and discrete consumers of policies are impacted, and they have the experience, they know exactly the nuances in the market. They know the obstacles that obstruct or that lock down the economic potentials of this country. It's their daily existence. They understand exactly where policies are not working, where where there is disconnect. So they are eminently qualified to bring authentic perspective to crafters of policies and government. But there is no way that business can achieve that without first cleaning out its house. This is a case of the proverbial physician that needs to heal itself. We have listened to accusations and counter accusations of how business is the supply side of corruption. The public sector is fingered as the demand side. So apparently, it takes the two sectors to make corruption happen. Hello? Hello?
Continue, madam. We can hear you.
All right. So business, the field or the environment, the business environment is the natural habitat of business. They are able to bring authentic perspective to government on where policies are not working, where there has been some disconnect or what should be done. Indeed, there should be a lot of interaction and feedback that government benefit from business. Business has to be standing well. We have no other, democracy creates space for engagement, but integrity is required on the part of business to be a good partner to government in pushing necessary reforms that we require. Yesterday, we heard from Nasima, for instance, that most business associations now self-regulate. That is heartwarming. Ethics committee, it's something that every association that wants to be in good standing should consider. Code of ethics for members, for example, to regulate operations and engagements of the private sector. Support government institutions to be strong. We need, as business, to walk the talk and to be an example. The public sector also has indicted the private sector. Sometimes it is business that does not have the time to wait online. It's business that wants to fast track stuff, procedures. It's business that wants to, even when the public sector is not demanding. Most times, business don't have the time to waste. And the only way they resolve the issues will be to settle, as it is called. My message to us all, to Nigeria, for instance, today, is the two sectors have to work together. We've got to have confidence in each, the sectors have to share confidence. Permit me to share a quick statistics with you. There is real correlation between per capita income and sustainability of this democracy. Where the economy is underperforming, for example, under $1,500, if per capita income is under $1,500, research has shown that the lifespan of that democracy is only 8 short years. It is 18 years if per capita income is between $1,500 and $3,000. Above $9,000, there is insignificant chance that democracy will fail. 32 countries only are above the $9,000 combined democracy of 736 years. What this means is that if we do not mind this economy, if both the public sector and the private sector do not give appropriate response, we are not going to assure this democracy. There's no way we can secure this democracy, and it is obvious. Business, therefore, as it pushes reform agenda, needs to walk the talk. Advocacy is not armchair. There must be trust in the process. And that is the only way we can secure a future for succeeding generations of Nigeria. It is not acceptable that in the midst of plenty, we have opportunities locked down in the bellies of the grounds of this country. It is not acceptable that Nigerians live in squalor and there doesn't seem to be any light in the horizon. So my challenge today, as we speak, as you push reform and have dialogue engage the public sector, my appeal is to business as operators who are eminently qualified to bring authentic perspective and share information with the government or the public sector. We need to do much more. Embrace code of ethics. And I'm sure that we will achieve desired results. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam. Thank you very much. Just to quickly share some additional perspectives to support what Mrs. Badamosi just said. In the organized private sector, the issue of code of ethics for the business community is very important. In the LCCI, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we have a code of ethics that we hand over to members as they join. We also try to compel or enjoin businesses to incorporate or embed corporate governance standards in the way they do business. We need to support institutional capacities of government agencies because we know that many of the government agencies have capacity issues in terms of even enforcing existing regulations, in terms of ensuring there is proper intelligence and sanctions against private sector misbehavior. We also need to support the agencies of government with intelligence because the agencies of government cannot be everywhere. So if you want an environment that is very ethical for businesses, that where there is level playing field, it is important that we support the institutions of state with proper intelligence. And we should also be very consistent in our advocacy for free enterprise. Free enterprise is a very sound business practice, economic philosophy that is known to have, ensure that there is growth and advancement in any society. We should go for unfettered competition through the institution of appropriate competitive framework, rule of law, the reform of the criminal justice system. We should also push for regulatory reforms because there are some regulatory structures that are in themselves create the atmosphere for corruption. We should promote free market principles, and we should also advocate for proper remuneration of the staff of the key institutions. Because when institutions are not properly remunerated, they become also vulnerable to corruption. To use more of technology and minimize human interface. These are some of the advocacy things that the kind of reforms that the private sector expects to come from the public sector in order to ensure that we minimize the incidence of corruption in the economy and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. You've been listening to Dr. Muda Yusuf, the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce, LCCI, and the Country Director of SIPE, Mrs. Omoumi Badamosi. as they've been taking us on this wonderful discussion. Now, as I did mention, this is a Q&A session, and while they were speaking, we're collating some of the questions that have been coming in. So right about now, we'll go straight to answering those questions. Now, first on my list, this question is directed to the DG of LCCI. Now, sir, the question reads this way: how do we handle the issue of other businesses not being willing to work with you if you're not willing to accept some kind of corrupt practice or bribe? You're a business. How do you handle the issue of you want to do business with another brand, and because you're not ready to play to their tune, as they usually say, they are not willing to do business with you? How do you handle such situation? How do you survive as a business?
Well, this is part of the things I said. There are what I can call a system-wide problem around corruption, which we need to work collectively to be able to deal with. Because I've seen cases where I've gone to a place to ensure that we procure something, and the man who is selling, even before saying anything, was asking how much he should write on the invoice. I said, why should we be asking him that? He said, well, most of the procurement officers that come, that is the way they do. They just dictate how much should be written on the invoice. So I think first is the issue of self-regulation. Second, we must also have individually the corporate governance principles and the discipline as to what exactly we should do and what exactly we cannot do. Because individually, we also have a role to play. When we come across such dirty things, we should also have the courage to walk away from them.
Fantastic.
And collectively, we should work together to make sure that we stop such practices.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, the second question goes to Mrs. Badamosi. The question goes this way, ma'am. How can businesses clean house and maintain a corrupt-free work environment? You did mention earlier that businesses should clean house. Now, this question is saying, in a more practical way, how can businesses indeed clean their house and maintain a corrupt-free work environment?
I think it is about self-regulation, just like the DG has shared with us. Members that do not conform to code of conduct, a code of ethics within the association should not be. It starts from when you admit. There must be strict procedures or process of admitting members. Membership recruitment and retention should be watched very, very closely. Sometimes because associations are, driving for resources, dues, they're just taking applicants without due diligence, without ensuring that those who want to join association have been well scrutinized. The membership development and recruitment committee must be more deliberate in the process of membership recruitment. I think this is one way we will ensure that those who talk the talk, they walk the same, they walk their talk. Associations have members now that sometimes we need to be sure that at that point, that will be my contribution to that. That let's make sure that our recruitment process and retention process is
Okay, good, madam. Now we have this other beautiful question that came all the way from a viewer in Zamfara State. It reads this way. It's a greeting and a message all attached. I'm going to read it out just the way it was sent. Hello, good day to all respected guests and members of the panel. My question is, I am from Zamfara State. What I see What I saw this week in Zamfara State's by-election is totally condemnable. The way corruption has conquered the lives of citizens, you see, I wonder why Zamfara State did not have open government partnership, OGP, because the way our government has used our money to buy votes is totally unaccepted, and our people need to be educated on election and electoral process. So, how can we start with fighting these evil things happening in our society? Because if not, election is going to be difficult in our society. Thank you. Now, maybe we'll start with the DG of LCCI. Sir, what's your take on this question?
Well, this is it's not strictly a business question. This is part of the problems that we face in our electoral process. And this is part of the reasons we have the quality of governance that we have. Because we have an electoral process that does not place sufficient premium on the quality of candidates, on what the candidates can offer, and all of that. It is all about those who have the money to dole out and so on. And because we also have so much poverty in the land, it is very easy to get support, by just throwing money around. So it is a whole big project. It requires a complete reorientation of the citizens, a proper education of the citizens, and the need to also let the citizens know that what we get from this democratic process is a function of the quality of the individuals that we put there. And it's not just about the immediate gains, it's about how the individuals can actually impact on the lives over the period of the tenure. So it's a very big challenge for governance, and I think it's something that we need to collectively, both the private sector and the public sector, need to do together to properly sensitize and educate the citizens on the need to have better quality democratic process.
Well said. Now, Madam Badabonsi, what's your take on this question? Hello, madam.
I lost you temporarily.
Okay. Oh, but did you get the question, or should I take it again? We had a question from Zamfara. Did you get the question, or should I take it again?
Please.
I should take the question again.
Please, yes.
Okay, good. We had a question from someone from Zamfara State who said that based on the outcome of the recent by-election in the state, that it was very condemnable, that the way funds were used to buy votes is something that is totally unacceptable, and that people need to be educated properly on elections and electoral processes. That how can we start with fighting this evil that is happening in our society? Because if not, election is going to be difficult in our society. What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's about strengthening the institutions of governance and tackling poverty. A lot of, those who are involved in, electoral malpractices, it's, when the chips are down, it's about poverty for those who, for instance, the electorate, So strengthening institutions of governance is what will be the key.
Great, great. Okay, we still have questions coming in. This next one goes this way. How much of our discussions and decisions will the government of our country accept and get them implemented?
Well, the structure of this program is that at the end of the program, and we have had similar programs in the past, we generate documents that are outcomes of all these discussions, and we transmit them to the appropriate agencies of government. we transmit to the National Assembly, to the relevant ministries, and to the presidency. And beyond that, we also use it as advocacy documents, in our various advocacy programs, seminars, press conferences, interaction with the media, and so on and so forth. So it's a multi-dimensional approach to ensure that we influence the direction of policy and the direction of the conduct of our regulatory agencies. And it's something that we have to be consistent about. Because if we are consistent about it, at least gradually, we'll see some results from those advocacy.
Very true. The more you do things, the more it becomes well imprinted. Madam Badamosi, would you want to say something to that?
Yes. The Center for International Private Enterprise over the years have supported business associations in this country to undertake pre-election debates, educate their members on how to, train their eyes to see the real issues and how exactly they should give appropriate response to candidates and to the election. Only recently, earlier in the year, because of the difference in electoral calendar, Kogi just had his election debate. And it is here that candidates are brought to share exactly what will be the thrust of their economic policies. They get to answer questions from the electorate. And then that process informs the members of the of business of the association to vote the candidates that they believe will push economic reform and will be the appropriate candidates to go to the polls.
Okay, well said, madam, well said. Well, we still have some other questions, but looking at our time, we're already well pressed, and even I'm getting signal that our keynote speaker is already getting ready. So for the remaining questions, we'll do well to answer them and send them over as communique. So I'll be handing over to the DG to wrap up this session, of which he's the moderator, before I introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, let me, on this note, express our appreciation to all those that have joined us in this session. This is to acknowledge from the discussion that we have had that the problem of corruption is not just a public sector phenomenon, there's also a private sector dimension. And this also speaks to the fact that those of us in the private sector also have a whole lot to do to improve on the situation, and we need to push for appropriate reforms. We need to do a lot more self-regulation to minimize the incidence of corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Please go and have a round of applause as the DG leaves. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, let me quickly mention that why this session was going on, though I did mention the name earlier, but I did also say that when they come in, I would recognize their presence. So while the session was going on, Professor Aduku Armstrong Augustine Idachaba, the Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission, sneaked in, and we want to capture him and also let everybody know that he's in our midst. So please, a round of applause for Prof for joining us. Thank you, sir, for joining us out of your busy schedule. Thank you very much, sir. Now, as I did mention, we're very happy and glad that our keynote address speaker is already online with us, and is no other person than Professor Kingsley Moghalu, professor of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, Massachusetts, and the former deputy governor of the central bank, a very well-known figure. He will be our keynote speaker for day 2 of our event. So right about now, ladies and gentlemen, make welcome as Professor Kingsley Moghalu has a session. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. And you?
Very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You have the floor, sir. We're all ears.
Oh, good. Good. Should I go ahead?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say hello, good afternoon. It's very early in the morning where I am right now. And it's my great pleasure to join you this afternoon. And I'll be speaking briefly on the matter of financial inclusion and business ethics. And in speaking on that topic, I want to remind us, as I'm sure maybe some people who might have spoken earlier, that the matter of business ethics or the ethical way of doing business is not only about corruption. I have a definition of business ethics here in front of me, which says it's the study of appropriate business policies and practices regarding potentially controversial subjects that include corporate governance, insider trading, bribery, discrimination, corporate social responsibility, and fiduciary responsibilities. So, that's the context in which I'll be discussing financial inclusion and business ethics. I'm particularly pleased to say a few words about this because of the role that I had the honor and the privilege to play as a deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria from 2009 to 2014. I was deputy governor for financial stability for most of my tenure, but also for a while, deputy governor for operations. And both roles intersected heavily with financial inclusion. I was responsible for financial inclusion as the DG FSS. And I was also a board member of the Global Alliance for Financial Inclusion in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and helped to set the financial inclusion target for various countries around the world. And at that time, we set our target for Nigeria to be 80% of financial inclusion by 2020. This was about 2012 or 2013. I left in 2014, so I don't know where we are now exactly. I also am very pleased to be discussing this matter because I also happened to have led the team that introduced the bank verification number, BVN, when we were at the bank under the overall leadership of Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, the governor at the time. And we discussed, we did the BVN because of our frustration at that time with the slow pace of the National Identity Management Scheme, the National Identity Number. And so we decided that the financial system over which we had regulatory control, that we would introduce a unique identifier. And that's why we went ahead and did it. So, I think that financial inclusion contributes to, business ethics and to limiting waste in a number of ways that I'd like us to think about. The first, and when we talk about financial inclusion, of course, we're talking about a series of steps that the central bank has taken in the Nigerian financial system. They include the introduction of non-interest banking. They include the microfinance, reviews of the microfinance policy, and then they include electronic banking products, electronic payments, and the cashless policy. So the whole point of all these things was to bring more and more people into the financial system. And, one of the first things, but of course, the electronic banking products have caught the attention of most people, and I think have been most widely used. Electronic banking transactions, first of all, they're very traceable. And cash oftentimes may not be as traceable as electronic banking transactions. This is one of the reasons we went cashless this is one of the reasons we went towards electronic products in addition to efficiency. Now, when we were doing this policy, a friend of mine, or somebody who was a friend of my in-laws, met one of them at a social function and told my in-law to please go and deliver a warning to Dr. Moelo, and that he's just messing things up. I cannot pay bribe with POS. What does he mean? I had a great laugh when I heard this, but I think it tells you the mindset at the time when we introduced some of these reforms and how we met resistance, but continue to push ahead. And I'm very glad that today, several years later, many of those things that were so controversial in those days, today are just par for the course. They're just the norm. So electronic banking transactions, they're traceable and they help in the fight against corruption. They help to increase the ethical culture and component of doing business in Nigeria. And most people who have good intentions and clear intentions and transparent intentions try to use them. So that's the first way. The second, I think, is that financial inclusion through mobile banking, of course, makes banking transactions much more efficient. There is, it's just faster, it's, quick, very neat, moves at the speed of a button. And I think that's an innovation that when we brought it in, we were ahead of many countries around the world, including even countries like the United States at that time. Thirdly, financial inclusion contributes to environmental sustainability, which is an important part of business ethics, because business ethics includes the whole notion of sustainability, that business should do well by doing good, should help to create a sustainable environment. And so when we use mobile banking, it spares the environment of the destruction of unusable paper notes, millions and millions of these paper notes. And there was a process that we call briquetting at the central bank, how we destroy used and dirty notes after periods of time. But this, of course, has environmental implications. Fourthly, financial inclusion advances business ethics, in my view, because it promotes equitable access to economic opportunity. And that's, of course, the number one reason. It brings more people into the financial system and expands access to the poor, many of whom have mobile phones in Nigeria, but may not have a lot of the other kinds of assets. So that's an important advantage of financial inclusion. Fifthly, financial inclusion advances inclusive economic growth and financial deepening. Because when you look at part of the problem we have in Nigeria, we talk a lot about GDP growth, but that is a fool's errand as far as I'm concerned. Growth that is not inclusive in the context of improving the efficiency of labor, in the context of being diversified across sectors, in the context of distributing the effects of economic growth between the wealthy and the poor, then that sort of growth is not sustainable. And growth in Nigeria has rarely been inclusive. And I think we should focus a lot more on this rather than just on GDP, numbers from my point of view. So finally, financial inclusion, represents a significant business opportunity, in my view, for the private sector. Because as more and more people are brought into these financial systems, they're able to transact. And of course, there are profits to be made by banks and other financial agents in the system. So, that's the core of what I wanted to say about the role of financial inclusion. We have seen, the BVN in Nigeria has 40 million users, whereas the national identity number has about 36 million users. And I think that the BVN has so many more potential uses to which it could be put that we should actually think about. We could also use it as a form of voting, as a form of electronic voting. We can use it in a number of ways that are quite innovative as when we introduced it into the system around 2013 or 2014. So, and I note also that there's been some even further reforms. There's now BVN Lite, there's BVN Premium, and so on. That's also, of course, because of the difficulties of capturing data to bring people into the financial system, where people live in, places that are not so easily accessible. We had a problem then registering people to come in the context of financial inclusion, where people would say, my address is so-and-so street, off so-and-so street, off so-and-so street, off so-and-so street. I mean, you have these unique problems. So I'm glad that the central bank seems to have taken a bit of an innovative way to separating those for whom you need more data in the system and those for whom you may need less data in the system. 2020 is going to be a major measurement year for financial inclusion. So it will be interesting to see where we are. The last I knew, 46% of Nigerians were excluded from the financial system, which was a bit higher than a number of other possibly comparable economies in Africa. South Africa had 26% exclusion. Botswana had 33% exclusion. Kenya had 32% exclusion. So financial inclusion is really a very important and futuristic issue for Nigerian business as a whole, not to talk about the Nigerian banking system. And indeed, we may end up, as we go into the future, seeing more and more branchless banks, less and less bricks and mortar in the financial system. But I also wanted to piggyback on speaking about financial inclusion to say one or two things about Africa, business ethics and the whole question of corruption in Nigeria generally. And I think we should know that it is very difficult to achieve an ethical business culture when the public sector is so rife with corruption. I think this is a very difficult thing to achieve. And we know that the private sector in Nigeria, in my view, is not as independent as it should be. There's a lot of codependency with the government. Of course, in every country, economic policy shapes the private sector. But in Nigeria, the government space, even though the private sector economy carries the economy, but the government space plays such an influential role. And when the state is weak, as we see it today, in my view, it's just not able to create an environment for ethical business to thrive in a country like Nigeria, which has so much potential. Political institutions must be strong. They must be robust before we can have strong economic institutions that can create an even economic playing field. So I think we make a little bit of a mistake when we think that we can have a thriving ethical business environment or a thriving culture of business ethics without addressing the issue of the absence of ethics in the public sector. So this is just one thing that I wanted to say. And how do I think we can improve, business ethics or the culture of ethics in business in Nigeria? I think, number one is that we really do need strong political reform in Nigeria. The structure of the Nigerian state creates an incentive for rent seeking, and rent seeking comes along with corruption. So when a lot of people say they are big business people in Nigeria, we know that they are big because they are in with the government. Very few people are able to thrive successfully, except maybe the tech sector, without direct government interventions. We need strong regulatory reform, to be able to enforce ethical standards in our business space. other than the banks, which are very heavily regulated, but even then, I don't know how successful we have been. A lot of businesses in Nigeria are just not regulated effectively. And so the ethical business culture suffers. Most importantly, perhaps, I think we need to begin to think about moving from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. What do we mean by this? We are talking about, the workers of companies being part owners and sharing in the profits of companies. This is one of the ways to improve an inclusive economy in Nigeria, where it's only the shareholders and the laborers are not part of it, but the company is making a lot of money. That's a problem. And it's a problem in a country like Nigeria, where you don't only have, very low inclusion levels, but you also have a very high degree of inequality. So I think, when we're thinking about business ethics, we should think about it in a wide sense. We need more ethics training in Nigerian business environment. We need the organized private sector to respond to public sector corruption and practices in Nigeria in a very robust way. And we need citizens, to protest, to engage in corporate activism and accountability. We may not be there yet, but this is something that we need to see, and we see it a bit in advanced countries. So those are, a few words I wanted to say about financial inclusion, and more broadly about the theme of the conference, and very pleased to have the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Fantastic. Please, I think that calls for a round of applause for those of us in here. That's beautiful, beautiful. And if there's one takeaway I took from what you said, sir, was the fact that in all, there must be strong political will, power, to help champion the mindset of the people. Because they say, when you lead on the right paths, people would follow you. And there's no two ways about it. For there to be any reasonable and tangible growth in any community, in any society, in any country, there must be a very strong political willpower from those from the very top. Then the citizenry would follow suit without a doubt. So thank you very much, sir. Professor Kingsley Moghalu, Professor of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, Massachusetts, and the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Oh, okay. I just heard that there's a question for Professor Moghalu. So I want to believe you're still with us.
Yes, I am.
Oh, beautiful. So let me quickly read this question out to you. It starts with a greeting. Good afternoon, panel members. My question is, how does one handle or manage nepotism in the private and public sector? As a procurement professional in the private sector, everybody approaches with favor, especially within the power blocks of the organization. If you do not yield to such requests, your colleague might so at the end of the day, they achieve their aim and your career growth is impeded. How do you handle this situation, sir?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think, there's no getting around the fact that our citizens need to be, more awake and more assertive about the standards of governance that they get from their political leaders. That is kind of happening now with the NSAS movement, and I think that is a very encouraging development. But I think we need to do that a lot more. There's been a very damaging mental conditioning of Nigerian citizens by the traditional politicians, the traditional political class, that has made people accept things that in most other countries citizens would not accept. And they accept it because some of these politicians have used the various wedges of ethnicity and religion and so on to divide the population. So that's number one. Number two is that based on this, at the end of the day, I have discovered in all my years in public policy that for a developing country like Nigeria, there's no getting away from the politics. If you think that you can have a good economy without the right type of political leadership, it is not possible. this will only end when the role of the government in the private sector is reduced, and the role of the government in the economy is reduced. The government's role in the economy for now is too strong. And not only is it too strong, I believe they should have a hand at the steering as the government, but it is not competent enough. So if you're not able, for example, to understand the difference or the balance between the state and the market, and how that balance should operate to build a productive economy, and you have the government making every decision imaginable. Today we close borders, tomorrow we open them. Today the Naira, we fix the price of the Naira. Tomorrow we do this. You know, the government, there's too much government in the Nigerian economy. And we need to elect in our next political cycle people who understand the economics of nations and how Nigeria's economy can actually meet its promise. And this is something for the organized private sector to think about. But if you have the organized private sector thinking that they can get individual advantages for their companies, but while they're supporting a political system that obviously has a lot of problems, then we're where we are. So I'm afraid, I thought I would wish I could give you a short-term solution like tomorrow morning, but these things are very foundational and we must attack the problem at the roots.
Fantastic. Well said, sir. Once more, we say a very special thank you to you, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, for making our time. Even though where you are, it's very early in the morning. We say a big thank you to you, sir, for buying our time to be with us. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, moving along now, we are going to have and watch another very interesting video on ethics first, solution to advance business growth in Nigeria. Greg Cohen, Director, Asoko Insight. And after which another video will follow, Business Champions video, and introduction of low risk investment. So please give your undivided attention as these videos will be showing. Please watch.
SMEs are the driving force of African economies, accounting for 40% of continent GDP and 50% of employment. But despite being the backbone of the economy, these businesses face significant market constraints that impede their full growth potential, in turn limiting overall economic development. The International Finance Corporation reports that SMEs in Africa experience an estimated financing gap for $330 billion annually. They lack access to capital to grow and face high barriers of integration into global value chains. Currently, there are over 350 million African SMEs that are unbanked, and only 50% can access financial products and services, according to the World Bank. Even when SMEs get access to financing, they endure higher lending rates to make up for the increased onboarding and due diligence costs bank incur due to lack of accessible and verifiable information about their operations. But what if there was a way to de-risk SMEs in Africa at scale? Enter Ethics First, an innovative new platform that is doing that by giving SMEs a route to improving their governance in a recognizable and standardized way and increasing their visibility to global partners and financiers. It is the business-led answer to Africa's compliance needs. Aimed at enhancing the integration of African SMEs into global supply chains, Ethics First offers a low-cost digital solution for businesses to strengthen their governance and anti-corruption management systems and boost their global reputation. How does it work? African companies are invited to register on Ethics First and follow the program to demonstrate the strength of their commitment to the Ethics First values in 3 stages. Green, business leaders sign a free integrity pledge to commit to enhancing their company's governance and control systems within a specified time frame. Silver, demonstrate enhanced anti-bribery and compliance measures specified for the size of the business and show effective leadership commitment to corporate ethics and integrity. Gold, Complete and independent compliance and due diligence verification and review by the Ethics First Compliance Advisory Committee.
Hi everyone, my name's Greg Cohen and I'm the COO of Asoko Insight, one of the implementing partners for Ethics First. For a quick background, Asoko provides corporate data feeds on Africa's private sector to global investors, banks, and multinationals. We work with the likes of the London Stock Exchange, the US and UK governments, the African Development Bank, the United Nations, and a variety of others to supply their African corporate data needs for various initiatives. We're therefore quite excited to be working together with SIPE and other partners on Ethics First, kicking off in Nigeria next year. So why are we a partner? We see Ethics First as a tool to help build up market efficiency in Africa, which is the key to economic growth. In order to drive market efficiency, we of course need access to information, the most fundamental ingredient and severely constrained across the continent. And the final piece to that is better digitalization of that information, which allows for scaling the accessibility. A Google report last month indicated that for every 10% increase in internet penetration, there's a 2.5% increase in GDP in Africa, which is higher than the global average, showing how important it is to digitize information. These same concepts are at the basis of African SME marketability. In order for lenders, investors, and traders to increase their activity and to see overall capital flows increase across the continent, we need new digital information layers on the continent that de-risks pursuing each of these business goals. This is especially important and exciting as Africa commences in the Continental Free Trade Agreement next year. So Ethics First will provide a structured digital feed of pre-vetted SMEs that Asoko is going to be supporting, which plugs into any professional user in Africa or abroad looking to onboard Africa's highest quality young and growing companies. We're excited to be working with our partners and look forward to a 2021 that's a year of renewed growth for the continent. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was a good one. I hope we all enjoyed that video and got the points as clear as they were delivered. So we say special thank you to Asoko Insight for those wonderful information that they gave out via those videos. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on to the next part of our program. We want to make a special announcement that we have a survey that we will be giving out, and it will be coming in form of the chat box. So please, as they come, we do well to answer those surveys and send them to us. We want to just find out this simple question: what do participants think about corruption and efforts to tackle corruption in Nigeria? Answer 5 questions to tell us what you think. So we will be sending you the link. Just pay attention to the chat box in the link where you're joining us, and you'll see them as they are spelled out, and you can answer those questions for us. Okay, the questions will pop up on the screen, and you do well to answer 5 of these questions. Tell us what you think about corruption and efforts to tackle corruption in Nigeria. So please do us that favor. As you see the questions, answer them and send them to us, and we'll collate them. Now remember too that as I did mention yesterday, tomorrow we shall be the winners of the 3-minute pitch challenges will be announced tomorrow, and the ABEC ambassadors as well will be announced tomorrow. And so you need to stay tuned to that, as we shall be announcing the winners of the 3-minute challenge and the ABEC ambassadors. Now, right about now, ladies and gentlemen, we want to take the conversation even more further and detailed on the specific topics as we go into our breakout rooms. And I want to quickly give us guides and as to how we can be part of this breakout sessions that will be happening. 3 of them will be happening simultaneously. The first panel session will be happening here at the Chambers, the LCCI Chambers premises in Victoria Island, Lagos. It will be happening live. And the topic that will be discussed is the menace of corruption on the engine of growth in Africa, entrepreneurs, and MSMEs. That session will be happening live. So all those that are joining us live at the premises here of the LCCI headquarters in Lagos, Nigeria, will be part of that session. Now, the second panel session, entitled Empowering the Media and Promoting Press Freedoms to Tackle Corruption and Strengthening Accountability in Nigeria. That session, to be part of that session, you will need to please look in the chat function and click on the link labeled Press Freedom. Follow the link and you will be part of that session. I repeat, please look at the chat function or the chat box and click on the link labeled Press Freedom. Follow the link and you'll be part of that second panel session. And that panel session will be streaming live on YouTube. So that is that for the panel session number 2. The panel session number 3, with the subject matter, Harnessing Technology to Mitigate Corruption in the Private and Public Sector. To be part of that session, please look in the chat function or the chat box and click on the link labeled Technology for Development. Follow the link and you will be part of the panel session number 3. And this session will be streaming live on Facebook. So those are the directions as to how we can be part of the 3 panel session, the breakout session that we shall be embarking any moment from now. And I'm going to quickly read out the panelists that will be part of these 3 sessions that I just mentioned, that I just described. The first one that will be happening here live at the LCCI premises on the subject matter, the menace of corruption on the engine of growth in Africa, entrepreneurs, MSMEs, and corruption. We'll have the following individuals: Mr. Celestine Okeke, development consultant and lead partner at SEED. He'll be presenting. We're also going to be having Dr. Olayinka Akanle, PhD, senior lecturer from the Federal University of Ibadan. We're having also Dr. Jumoke Odwole, special advisor to the president on the ease of doing business, and Prince Degun Agwade, president and chairman of Council, National Association of Small and Medium Enterprises, NASME. And finally, on this panel is Mr. Bankole, Director, Enterprise Development Center, EDC. He will be moderating this session, and that session will be happening here at the LCCI premises live. The other session, Empowering the Media and Promoting Press Freedoms to Tackle Corruption and Strengthen Accountability in Nigeria, will be having the following individuals: Fisayo Soyobo, investigative journalist, pioneering editor of The Cable; Anthony Osei Brown, Bureau Chief, Bloomberg, Nigeria; Miss Azuka Ogugwa, acting head of Public Enlightenment, Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offenses Commission, ICPC; and a very notable lady in the media industry in person of Mrs. Agatha Amata, media expert and consultant and CEO of Inside Out; Jean Wassenstrom, founder and director of Wassenstrom Group; and finally, Frank Brown, Director, Anti-Corruption and Governance Center, SIPE. He will be the moderator of this session. And the final session number 3, Harnessing Technology to Mitigate Corruption in the Private and Public Sector and to Maximize Public Policy for Public Good. We'll be having the following panelists: Oluseun Onigbinde, co-founder and director of Budget; Mr. Agada B. Abochi, MD CEO of Unified Payment Services Limited; Jafet Omojua, social justice blogger, influencer, and author; Mr. Aliyu, head, Regulation and Database, Federal Bureau of Public Procurement, BPP; Ansa Kalamara from Sipisa; Twanda Mudibu, head of business development at Soko Insight; And another notable gentleman, Ms. Dr. Ayotunde Koka, the CEO of RAC Center. And finally, Shena Adams, Global Director, Accountability Lab, Nigeria. He will be moderating. So ladies and gentlemen, right about now, let's all join in the various trip panel session that will be going on simultaneously. And I would like to invite Mr. Peter Bankole, Director, Enterprise Development Center, EDC, who will be handling the live session that will be going on here at the LCCI premises, and he shall be taking over and introducing his other panelists as the panel session kicks off. So please, ladies and gentlemen, we'll come back much later and continue today's program. Thank you.
The framing of the panel, and then I'll introduce Fisayo Soyombo, who we're very honored to have with us as the lead presenter, who will speak for 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then we'll move into our panelist presentations, which will each go for about 5 minutes. And we're very honored to have a special last-minute addition to our panelists. We just found out this morning that Professor Armstrong Idachaba is with us today, and he'll be our lead panelist presenter. So with that, I'll introduce myself and give you a sense of what we're up to here in the session. We're hoping to reserve lots of time at the end for questions, which you can put to us in the chat function. My name again is Frank Brown, and I'm with the Center for International Private Enterprise. I am the head of something we call the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center at CIPE, or the Center for International Private Enterprise, which is a co-sponsor, co-organizer of this event. So I'm devoted about the last 10 years of my life to anti-corruption work all around the world, mostly in emerging markets, including Nigeria. I think the reason I was chosen to lead this panel is that I spent the first part of my career as a journalist, and most of that time in Russia, based in Moscow. Working as a journalist, especially in Russia, not so much in the US, but in Russia, I grew to have a deep, deep appreciation for the role of local journalists. So as a foreign journalist, as an American journalist working for a Newsweek magazine in Russia, I was able to do my job in a free and safe way, but my Russian colleagues were constantly at significant risk, especially if they were colleagues who took on the government, whether it was the federal government or local government, because the Russian media environment like many countries, was a very mixed one. So you had independent journalists who took tremendous risks and typically weren't paid a whole lot and worked for publishing houses and television stations that didn't have connections with the government. And then you had a variety of other journalists, many of whom it was hard to tell where their allegiances lay. So some would take payments under the table to write certain kinds of stories. They were called ordered stories in Russian. And you never quite knew the motive for a newspaper or a journalist publishing what they did. And one of my most powerful experiences from Russia that I'll never forget was interviewing a journalist named Anna Politkovskaya. And she was somebody who became famous. She was a middle-aged woman, a mother of 2 kids, who late in life got the drive to become an investigative journalist. And she decided to focus on the region of Chechnya, which, as many of you may know, is a breakaway part of Russia. And she would travel down there to this war zone, essentially, and interview both sides of the conflict, the rebels, the Russian soldiers, the local warlords. And she did this tirelessly and was often threatened. I interviewed her in 2005, shortly after she got back from a short plane trip she took from Chechnya, during which she drank some poisoned tea. And for those of you who follow what happens in Russia, poison is often used to eliminate enemies of the government, most recently Alexei Navalny. So Anna Politkovskaya, a middle-aged woman, mother of 2, drank this poisoned tea, was hospitalized for several days, survived. And we spent some time in her living room talking about her take on Russian politics. An impressive, humble, brave woman. A few years later, when I had already moved back to the U.S., I was shocked to read in the newspapers that she'd been murdered in the lobby of her apartment building where I had interviewed her. And the folks were arrested and tried, but nothing ever came of it. It was never quite clear who ordered the murder. But she, to this day, stands out to me as the kind of brave woman and brave journalist, of course, whose actions made Russian democracy stronger, and whose actions were a beacon and a light and a model for ordinary citizens trying to understand what was going on around them, trying to make the right decision in the voting booth, for businesses as well, trying to understand where risk lay. So an individual like that is easy to hold up and had a very dramatic and heroic existence, but there are thousands of others who did the same work. And there are thousands of government officials as well who help protect them in big and small ways and protect the freedom of the press. And I think that's part of what we will be exploring today. And the overall framing of this panel is quite broad and will give everybody, the panelists and the folks in the audience as well, a chance to dig in on these issues and ask the questions that are relevant to you. At a point in Nigeria's history when I think the role of the press is as important as it's ever been. And I'll give you a sense of what the organizers of the panel and the overall conference had in mind when they put together this event, this part of the ABEC. So their idea was that the media is an essential part of civic engagement, serving as a primary watchdog to expose corruption and enhance accountability. And that, of course, we know is true. And we'll hear from a man who's devoted his life to whistleblowing about the importance of folks coming forward, speaking to journalists, and exposing wrongdoing so there can be accountability. But according to the 2016-2018 survey by Afrobarometer, there's been a real decline in press freedom. And at the same time, we're seeing insecurity, weak institutional safeguards, and the lack of resources and capacity create a whole range of pressures on journalism that undermines the professionalism and independence of journalists. So in that context, we're really at a crossroads and an acute moment. And I can't think of a better group of folks to have on the panel to explore these issues. We're very honored to have as our lead presenter a man who just days ago was awarded one of the top prizes that journalists can get, the Kurt Schork Award. And I'm speaking, of course, of Fisayo Soyombo, who won in the local reporter category, the Kurt Schork Award for international journalism. I'll give you a little bit of of background on Fisayo for those of you who don't know him, and then turn the microphone over for a 15-minute or so presentation by him. So Fisayo may be best remembered as the Nigerian journalist who spent 5 days in a police cell as a suspect and 8 days as an inmate in Ikoyi prison. He was tracking corruption in Nigeria's criminal justice system, after which the authorities contemplated arresting him. Or you may remember when he drove the equivalent of a stolen vehicle from Abuja to Lagos, passing through a whopping 86 checkpoints in a journey of over 1,600 kilometers that lasted a total of 28 hours and 17 minutes. So these are some of the things that Fisayo is best known for. He's won lots of awards, most recently the Kurt Schork Award, but he's also been a winner in the Maritime Economy category of the African Media Initiative Awards. He was awarded the Hans Verplo Newcomer of the Year Award, a Free Press Award, Journalist of the Year for Business and Economy Reporting, and he got a PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, Journalism Excellence Award. So with that, I'll turn the microphone over to Fisayo and let him speak for 15 minutes or so. I'm going to apologize to everybody on the panel. I may interrupt you if you're going over the time a bit, because I'm really aware of wanting to make sure everybody has time to speak and that the audience as well has time to ask some questions. So with that, a reminder to mute your microphones if you're not speaking and to put your questions in the chat function. And with that, I'll turn it over to Fisayo. Fisayo?
Yes, thank you so much, Frank. Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to other panelists. They're all people I respect, from Agatha to Anthony Osai Brown to Prof. It's quite an honor to be a part of this program. Straight away, I like to say that this is a very important topic to discuss from my point of view, because oftentimes when people talk about accountability and the fight against corruption, the role they allocate to the media is often that of the mouthpiece. You know, when we are done fighting corruption, let's invite the media to come and publish. When we have someone on the run, we have an Abdul Rashid Mena on the run, let's leak the story to the media. Oftentimes, the media is limited to an entity that should just give vent, to the war against corruption, rather than an active participant in the whole process of strengthening accountability and tackling corruption. So this topic is quite instructive, because it shows that really the media itself should be instrumental in the fight against corruption. A lot of times, the bigger picture of the value of the media isn't seen by many. We look at strengthening democracy and we are asking ourselves, we have two leading political parties. We want them to be responsible. We want to elect the best crop of leaders available to us. We want to create a system that allows the best among us to rise through political parties to the top and hold sensitive positions. But a lot of times we are not thinking that a core part of the entire democratic process is the information made available to the public by the media. We have presidents, we have the Muhammadu Buhari as president of this country today, in part to the role of the media, played in 2015, the way Buhari was sold to the people. And then quite a number of people didn't accept him in the past, thought, wow, like this is an enhanced form of the person we used to know, so maybe we should give it a trial. And so the media is quite an important part of whatever effort is going into tackling corruption, into strengthening accountability. As I said, the media is often seen as the mouthpiece, but the biggest role the media can play is impossible without independence. The biggest value that the media has is indeed independence. Independence to report stories without fear of attack, without fear of arrest, without fear of death, without fear of bodily harm, without fear of running out of business. And quite unfortunately, in the last few years, support for press freedom has been on the decline. Earlier this year, there was a report by a ranking of support for press freedom in 180 countries. It was done by Reporters Without Borders, and it ranked Nigeria 115, out of 180 countries, that were assessed, which means we are doing really badly. Nigeria is one of the worst places, not the worst apparently, but one of the worst places to practice corruption, to practice journalism, to practice independent journalism on the continent and in the world. I personally, I've experienced it firsthand a couple of times. I've been close to people who have experienced it a couple of times. Of course, as a journalist as well, I've followed developments in the media, and I do know that the support for press freedom in Nigeria is on the decline. And I'm just quickly going to talk about, I'll try not to exceed 15 minutes allocated to me. I'm going to talk about the mess that we are in at the moment and what we need to do to get out of it. How bad is it at the moment? Instead of enthroning a media that is independent and can help us all to make the best of who we are as a people and as a country, what we are witnessing currently is a crisis of, I'm going to talk about four things that we are witnessing currently, and I'm going to start from the one that is usually top secret in Nigerian journalism, the one that journalists often don't like to talk about, publishers of newspapers don't like to talk about, editors don't like to talk about. We journalists enjoy, or sometimes by the design of our job, we have no problems with criticizing people destructively, constructively, but we often do not look in-house. And I say that first crisis that we have when it comes to the role of media and standing accountability is that there is a crisis of trust. There's a crisis of trust. The people often do not trust journalists. Someone goes on, not to mention any station, you go on TV, you see a report, and then you're asking, is it true? Premium Times did an investigation on Lekki killings, and people still believe nobody died. The CNN did a story, and still people say, look, what CNN has done is a hatchet job. Only one death, only one injury, only one person missing. So the level of trust in the media by the public is on the wane for a number of reasons. You have how the desperation for survival, how journalists want to survive, media houses want to survive. It's an industry that is in crisis financially, and then it's a recurring thing that stories get killed, stories get turned on their head. Sometimes the stories we read, I particularly preach audience sophistication. I tell people, any newspaper you read, you have to ask yourself, before you read, you have to ask yourself, who is the owner? What is the owner's interest? Who runs it? Who are the staff? What are their individual interests? Before you decide what to believe. And you shouldn't get to that point where people can't trust what they read. But we are currently at that level because of the financial crisis, also because of a crisis of talent. The media is experiencing a really tough crisis of talent because I teach a course once a year at the University of Ibadan, online journalism, and I get to interact with students in different departments. The bulk of people in communication and language arts don't want to come to journalism. They want to go to public relations. They want to go to advertising because they know that's where the huge pay is. And until we get to that point where the media is once again attractive to the public, we will keep experiencing a situation where the media is not playing its role effectively. We also have a policy crisis where agencies that should indeed be interested in what the government is doing rather use their powers to stifle the media. Case in point, NBC, Nigerian Broadcast Commission, sanctioning Arise TV, AIT for their use of NSAS content, it still beats me how NBC thought the best thing to do was to muzzle the media. Shots have been fired at protesters. The key, to digress a bit, the key question people ask about Lekki toll gate incident of October 20 is how many people died. But that is even going too far. Soldiers went to a toll gate where people were protesting peacefully and shot at them. And the army continued to insist that shots were not fired. On the day it happened, I got phone calls from people who were there. I heard the gunshots myself live before DJ Sweet even went on air. I heard live gunshots myself. But you have the army. The army continued to insist that no live bullet. Initially, no soldier was there, no live bullet, and then the NBC thought the best it could do was to sanction the media, to sanction TV stations who used content from protest ground. Now, 6 weeks, right? 6 weeks, yes, 6 weeks or thereabout after that incident, not one person has been held accountable for what happened at the toll gate. And it's so easy. So many newspapers don't even want to report it, because they know if the government, if the agencies that should be supporting them move against them, what happens? You have the Central Bank of Nigeria freezing the accounts of individuals. But of particular interest to me is that a group called Gatefield, funded journalists to go cover the protests. And when I say funded, I don't even mean significant funding. I'm talking about 70,000 a year, 100,000 a year. Everything Gatefield spent on empowering journalists to report protests was not up to 2 million. It was just a little over 1 million. And for that reason, the account was frozen. And so we have a crisis of funding in journalism. You now have one or two groups who say, let's fund independent journalism. And what happens to them is that they get muzzled by agencies. So we have a case where policies are used to muzzle the press, to muzzle promoters of independent journalism. And then we also have, finally, repression by authoritarian governments. This is not exactly to attack the government or attack the ruling party, but I don't think it has ever been this bad that in a democracy, the people are so afraid to talk. I can say this as an investigative journalist that I've never experienced a time like this when the people are so afraid to talk. When people who have been wronged by government tell the journalist that, look, I don't want to talk because I don't know what will happen next. I'm still alive. The person who is dead, who is injured, I need to keep that person alive. It is that bad. And it's also an era where journalists don't want to report. For every independent story you want to do, the first question you're asking yourself is, how do I ensure my safety while I'm on this story? How do I ensure my safety when I'm done? We shouldn't ever get to this point where the journalist isn't thinking of how best to unravel the story. Who are the sources I need to talk to? Where do I need to travel to? How do I need to write my story? What pictures do I need? What videos do I need? Now, the first question on the lip of every investigative journalist in this country is, how do I stay alive in the course of this story and after this story? And it doesn't help. Lots of journalists who have been harassed for no reason. Agba Jalingo. What was Agba Jalingo's offense? Agba Jalingo published stories about corruption, about the microfinance bank that the governor the governor launched, supposedly backed with funds. 1 year later, 2 years later, no microfinance bank. And where is the funding? I expected the governor to indeed prove his innocence, prove that the story was wrong. What happened? Arrested, tried for terrorism, trying to destabilize the peace of the state, trying to overthrow a sitting government. We have my example went undercover at the police station and the prison unearth things that I thought the interior minister would be interested in, the controller of prisons would be interested in. And what did they do? They had a meeting, and then the next plan was to arrest me. So we want the media to help drive accountability, help drive the anti-corruption process. We have a government in place, and one of its core selling points, unique selling point in 2015 was to fight corruption. Such an irony that it is under the same administration that the media can't then do its job of fighting corruption properly. Because this is a policy initiative, and at the end of the day, we want to look at way forward. I mean, I think we all know all the problems. From time to time, we talk about these things. We interact with people. The natures of our job allow us to know what the problems are. But going forward, happily, I'm not quite sure if that is still the case. Someone from ICPC ought to be here, and if that's the case, we need institutions who identify journalists who are their partners. You always will have, regardless of the media station, whether it is the Nation newspaper backed by the APC chieftain, whether it is the Sun backed by someone who was in PDP, maybe he's now in APC, I don't even know, because they keep defecting from a party to another. Regardless of the political interest of any newspaper, there are always journalists who want to support the fight against corruption, who want a system, a society where the leaders are accountable, where you don't just go to a toll gate, shoot at people, and get away with it, where you don't steal public funds as a minister, in an administration claiming to be fighting corruption, and you get away with it. There are journalists like that. And how many minutes do I have left, Frank? Am I running out of time? No.
If you about one more minute, if you don't
One
mind,
more minute.
Fisayo.
So there are always journalists like that who can be identified and then can work with agencies. At the end of the day, regardless of how bad standards are dropping in Nigerian journalism, there are shining lights. People are in journalism for different reasons. Those who want to use journalism as a stepping stone to getting a foothold on political office, those who just want to make money, who want to hobnob with the rich and powerful, but there are also those who indeed work for the public interest. And agencies need to do more in locating them and working more with them. It's incumbent on the government to indeed see investigative journalists, independent journalists as partners, in progress. I was in a government agency recently, and they were talking about a journalist, and they were saying that journalist that's always fighting government. What is a journalist whose only crime, in quote, is to consistently report on corruption? Without that shift in mentality from the government, we will continue to have a system where corruption thrives and accountability is difficult to have. The public as well have to support independent journalism. Enough of the media is this, the media is that, the media is corrupt, and brown envelopes and all that. We should support journalism that is independent. Same solution I prefer to politics. When we say APC and PDP are birds of a feather, then we need to make a conscious effort to raise a new party that can compete with these two leading parties. Same with politics. Same with journalism. You have a system where you don't trust a lot of newspapers. A lot of them are backed by money bags with interest. Nigerians need to come together to support independent journalism. It's the only way forward. As long as we have a media that relies on corporate Nigeria, that relies on patronage from the government, it's indeed going to be extremely difficult to have the media play any role in bolstering accountability in Nigeria.
Fisayo, thank you very, very much. I can't think of a better way to frame the discussion we're going to have this afternoon than to do what you've done, which, as somebody who's on the front line, investigative journalist, just recognized with one of the world's most prestigious journalism award, laying out the case very strongly for independent journalism, but also touching upon the basic tension that exists between the role of the government and the role of journalists and the free press. And so with that in mind, the transition to somebody you just mentioned, the Director General of the Nigeria Broadcasting Commission, couldn't be better, couldn't be more apt. I wanted quickly, though, to remind folks where they are. This is the panel on empowering the media and promoting press freedom. We're going for about another 50 minutes. If you have questions, please put them in the chat function. We just heard from Fisayo Sayombo who won the Kurt Schork Award just days ago. And coming up next, we'll hear from Professor Armstrong Idachaba. And then we'll hear from a couple folks, journalists themselves from Bloomberg, and then from Agata Amata, then from somebody who's devoted his life now to whistleblowing and preserving the rights of whistleblowers, and then from somebody from the ICPC itself, which Fisayo just referenced, Azuka Agugua. So with that, I'd like to introduce Professor Armstrong Idachaba, who's the Director General of the Nigeria Broadcasting Commission. He took over that position in February of this year, but he's been there at the NBC for a while, serving before taking over the position of Director General as the Director of Broadcast Policy and Research. He began early in his career, he was a writer, a journalist. He was a feature writer for the Nigerian Voice newspaper. After that, he went on career in academia and lots of degrees, which I think would take up much of this presentation if I were to list them all. But he took executive management courses at Georgetown University and the Kennedy School at the Harvard University here in the United States. And he also is a visiting lecturer at Bingham University in Abuja and Nasarawa State University. So with that, I'll turn over the microphone to Professor Armstrong Idachaba and thank him very much for being a last-minute addition to our panel and giving it a sort of relevance and timeliness that is much appreciated. Professor?
Thank you very much, Brown. I hope I got your name right, Frank Brown.
That's right.
Thanks for doing a great job. Let me also pay my respects to the panelists. Some I have met, a few I haven't met. But let me thank Fisayo for a good opener. And as I listened to Fisayo, I was delighted that he spoke from the heart. He was very frank and sincere. And I think it's a good point to start the exchange. Of course, what struck me the most was the point you made when you were introspecting, the position of the Nigerian journalists. You were sincere enough to acknowledge that the Nigerian journalist faces a crisis of trust, and among other challenges, some of which you also said hinged on poor financial sources and support. And again, I think it is great that you acknowledge that. And that, again, for me, is the main crisis. If you look at the theme of what we're looking at generally about ethics, the journalism profession is one that is founded on trust, on integrity, on believability, and transparency. And these are ethical foundations. Once a profession faces that crisis, then it makes itself amenable to all kinds of insinuations, to all kinds of undervalue, if you want, and it becomes difficult, for it to be the instrument for positive engagement as it ought to be. And I say this in direct reference to some of the allusions that have been made with regard to the NSAS campaign and the role of the NBC. Basically, the NBC is a regulator, and what the regulator does is to ensure that ethics are carefully followed. The issue at Lekki was not whether soldiers came. That has been established as a fact. The issue is not whether shots were fired. That also has been established as a fact. But the contention has been with the degrees of inaccuracies, and unauthenticated manipulations that follow the reportage. As it began, many broadcasters alluded that it was a massacre. And Fisayo, I will encourage you to look up at the meaning of a massacre. A massacre is not just about one or two killings. It's actually lots of several mutilation, killings, injury, devastation in large scores of numbers. And broadcasters repeated that myth without any foundation. As we speak, even you alluded to it not quite long ago, that perhaps the exactitudes have not been really established. At the same location, and this is the point I always make, there was a BBC reporter who reported the facts as they came. She said, yes, she was there. She saw the soldiers came, shots were released into the air, asked whether anybody was killed. At the point that she left, she said nobody was killed. She didn't see anybody killed. Now, but immediately after that, so many journalists, other reporters said it was a massacre. And what does a massacre do, basically? When you say it's a massacre, you heighten, you aggravate the level of anger among the people. And we saw that happen. There was a lot of destruction that occasioned the reportage. So I wouldn't want us to go into details of what happened, but my expectation is that for both print and broadcast, that broadcasters be sure of their facts. Authenticate your facts before you report, knowing that inaccuracies or misrepresentations, or misreportage can have their consequences. Now, I want to make the point about using the Nigerian digital switchover project, which is, in any case, is coming into Lagos very soon. I want to make the point that it's an opportunity that we expect that Nigerians indeed, and people across the world, investors and media people will cash in. Of course, we have talked about how the media can promote pluralism, how the media can create empowerment for the citizenry. And we believe that the digitization of broadcasting in Nigeria is one avenue for citizen empowerment, not only in terms of the jobs that will be created, also in terms of the opportunities that it will create with regards to transfer and acquisition of technology. We are also very confident that in the process, we will reduce the communication information gaps between the haves and the have-nots in Nigeria, because there is a social inclusive imperative in the digital switchover project. The idea of the federal government is to create that opportunity, that enablement, where the average Nigerian can have access to digital technology, where the ordinary Nigerian can interact. They too can contribute into the journalistic space, ask questions, and participate to the democratic process. And that is why we in NBC have taken this opportunity to come to Lagos to talk to journalists like you and other people within the journalism broadcast sector to be conscious that the digital switchover project is one that we all have to actually build a consensus around and see how we can advance the proposition, in a way that will help us to further increase, both the democratic, the cultural, political, and also the journalistic space. I heard Frank Brown say he was giving panelists 5 minutes. Maybe I've stayed within the 5 minutes, but if you want me to further elucidate on the points, I'm more than willing to do so.
So, Professor, thank you so much and for being so concise, to the point, and getting everything in. And also, I think, providing a forceful and polite rebuttal to Fisayo's points as well. What you're talking about, the sort of crisis in trust of the profession of journalism overall, and that the profession, faces challenges being an instrument of positive engagement. Those are certainly charges that are laid against journalists all over the world. Unfortunately, sometimes they're used, I believe, to sort of clamp down in a very broad way on journalists generally. So it's a really, really tough job, a difficult, nuanced, subtle job that you have in making those distinctions, because I think we can all agree that without an independent press, business democracy don't last too long, not in a healthy version. Your point about social inclusion of digital media is a really good one, and something that at SIPE we talk about frequently and often, that digital media is a way to include folks from parts of society who've traditionally been excluded. The danger there is one that Fisayo referenced, I believe, is that when you have many, many different voices, it's sometimes hard to distinguish which ones to listen to. And that, I think, will be a theme of the panel overall. And that's a good segue to our next speaker, who's certainly a voice that I think we should listen to. It's Anthony Osei Brown, and he's the bureau chief for Bloomberg in Nigeria. He coordinates Bloomberg's reporting from the country as a whole. Before joining Bloomberg, he was the editor at Business Day. He holds degrees from the University of Ilorin, degree in finance, and then a journalism degree, financial journalism degree with distinction from the University of Stirling in Scotland. He's the author of 3 books. I'll reference 2 of them. The first was Understanding the Nigerian Financial System for Senior Secondary Schools, and another was Smart Investment Tips for Retail Investors. With that, I'll turn the microphone over to Anthony and remind you, Anthony, you have about 5 minutes. When I turn my camera on, that'll be a cue that you're wrapping up. And after Anthony, we'll hear from James Wasserstrom, a whistleblower based in Greece. Anthony?
Okay. Thank you, Frank, my namesake, for this opportunity to talk about journalism and ethics in Nigeria. I would like to take it from the perspective of financial journalism, which is what I've practiced basically for the last 20 years. And I would just say financial journalism is quite critical to holding the government accountable. Our living, everything we do is about finance. Without finance, most of us won't be here talking on TV. We know what it means to be financially excluded. So financial journalism is key. And the government is all about finance. The biggest job of the government is managing finances and using finance as a tool for economic development. And that's what so financial journalists are basically very critical in holding the government accountable. But there are challenges, especially in Nigeria. I would like to narrow down to Nigeria. One of the biggest challenge for financial journalism in Nigeria is the inability for most journalists to be independent and to hold government accountable in a way that makes meaning. Most journalists are constrained by the environments they work in. We have the issue of very low pay for most journalists, and that has become a constraint to their ability to report independently. Then we have a very critical issue of businesses, media as a business. Most media businesses, sadly, are highly dependent on the corporate sector, and I'm talking of financial journalism, are highly dependent on the corporate sector and the government for their survival. Interestingly or ironically, these are the same sectors that they are supposed to hold accountable. And without and at the same time, they are dependent on these sectors. So it becomes a conflict here. How do you hold people you are dependent on accountable at the same time? So that's where you see a lot of compromise in journalism in the country, because a lot of these same journalists are supposed to hold the government accountable, are dependent on the government for their survival in terms of advert revenue. For most businesses, most media businesses in Nigeria, adverts revenue accounts for maybe 80 to 90% of their income. Copy sales makes less than 10% of their income. And that's a very critical factor for independent journalism. As long as you depend on advert income for the basic survival, most of the time you'll find it difficult to hold your your source of income accountable. And then we also have the issue of viability of the business for most media businesses. Their viability is also questionable in the long run. Most of them have no long-term viable plans to survive. And so without advert income on orders, they can't survive in the long run. Then we have a situation where the government is actively trying to compromise the media in one way or the other. So basically, most of the time, the government basically says, hey, you did a negative report on me, and we're going to cut adverts from you. We know this happened recently in 1 or 2 media houses. And that basically becomes a form of control over the media. And that's a very critical role that constrains the media's ability to report. So with most of these things, you find that most media houses in Nigeria operate in a very challenging environment. And I'll also talk about the critical role the media plays, mostly financial journalism play in economic development, in terms of without a strong and viable financial journalism, economic development will continue to be slow. because the media, one of the biggest tools for economic development, as I said earlier, is the budget, the government budget year to year. It's the job of the financial journalism to hold the government accountable on how they spend and they raise money and how they spend it. Without a strong financial journalism practice to be able to hold the government account, the government tends to spend the way it wants to spend without anybody pointing out, hey, there's a lot of inefficiency in spending. So, for instance, when the government says I'm spending ₦1 billion per kilometer of road, it's the job of financial journalists to come and say, hey, is this comparable to what is spent in other parts of the world? Is it higher? Is it lower? Is it an efficient use of money? Would this money have been better off used in other segments of the economy? When the government comes and says we are spending 80% of our revenues on recurrent expenditure, 80% of our budget on recurrent expenditure, it's the job of the financial journalists to question those things and hold the government accountable. Without a viable press, without a viable financial journalism sector, we miss this accountability. And at the end of the day, we have a lot of inefficiencies in government spending that leads to increased poverty. I think I'll stop here.
Anthony, thank you very much. And this is, it's great to hear from sort of a working journalist in the financial establishment talking about a conflict that I think is especially acute for folks writing about business. And that's holding accountable the industry that in many cases controls your survival, right? So there's an inherent conflict that becomes very, very personal. And the ability to manage that conflict and balance these different forces really often comes down to the ethics and strength and courage of the individual journalist. And that's a perfect sort of transition into our next speaker, who's going to speak about something that's very, very personal, and that's whistleblowing. Stepping forward and disclosing, revealing wrongdoing, often with significant personal risk. So the next speaker on the panel is James Wasserstrom, who's based in Greece, is an American citizen, has his own Wikipedia page where you can learn more about his work in Kosovo, the breakaway republic, now a country from the former Yugoslavia, where he worked for the United Nations Administration Mission in Kosovo, and where he identified massive fraud and abuse in the authority of Kosovo's public utilities, which at that point were the biggest contributor to Kosovo's GDP. His epic battle with the UN Secretary General about the wrongdoing that he revealed and the retaliation that he faced resulted in a court victory. But it also resulted in a law that the U.S. Congress passed that requires the UN and other international organizations to protect whistleblowers from retaliation or else face cuts in U.S. funding. Aside from the work in Kosovo and as a whistleblower, he spent 5 years as a senior advisor in Kabul in the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan. He's also taken part in the establishment of high-level anti-corruption commissions in Ukraine and Tunisia. And I'll let him speak more about this, but he's recently set up a nonprofit organization to support whistleblowers. So, Jim, with that, I'll turn the microphone over to you. Remind you, you have about 5 minutes, and when you see my face again as a cue to wind things up. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks, Jim.
Great, thank you, Frank. It's always a pleasure to see your face, even when it's to cut me off. And I also wanted to thank the other members of the panel I've been listening to. Very impressive award winners, professors, and heads of major organizations, authors, and very interesting perspectives. And telling your tales, sometimes of woe, is something with which I am very familiar, having worked closely with journalists over many years. Well, as Frank said, I am a whistleblower. I'm alive to tell the tale after almost getting killed. I stepped in the way of a $500 million kickback scheme that was to benefit my colleagues in the UN as well as Kosovo government officials. And I'm kind of a lightning rod now for all kinds of UN whistleblowers. I'm swamped with them all the time. Some of their stories are coming out in public. One today, actually, about UNDP and stealing money from the Global Environment Facility in Russia, which was all whistleblowers coming forward, and lots of other ones. Darfur, whistleblowers calling out the UN for covering up genocide in Central African Republic, pedophilia, and so on and so on. All of that comes from whistleblowers. So in my own case, as Frank said, I did get in the way of, I was the official in charge of the public utilities. I uncovered a scheme involving my colleagues to get a kickback from a major procurement contract there, a $5 billion procurement contract for which they were going to be collecting 10%, $500 million. And when they found out, the retaliation included my termination. Of course, that's a given. A hit they put out on me, which failed because of my Kosovo friends who protected me from it, arresting me, seizing my property, and attacking me, my character, relentlessly in your profession, that is, in the media. And the media swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. Oh boy, did they go for that story of me as an evil wrongdoer. I was breaking news. I was just a horrendous criminal for the first 2 or 3 years, and then I took the UN to court, and the court system there was ridiculous. It still is, but for whatever reason, miracle of miracles, it managed to work in my favor, and nobody expected that. And I didn't do anything, but suddenly I went in the eyes of the journalists from being a wrongdoer and an evil person to David versus Goliath. I guess that sells copy, and a heroic person. And I was the same person all along. Nothing changed. I was just following my moral compass in what I thought was the right direction. So I worked. In the end, I worked very closely with lots of journalists from all over the world, whether it was Al Jazeera, the Times of India, France 24, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, not Bloomberg, but lots of them, and they were and are today some of my closest allies in the fight against corruption, which is what I do professionally. And to protect whistleblowers, which is what I do personally. And as Frank mentioned, I am pushing the US government, which has been actually cooperating, no matter which administration and which party or which chamber of Congress, to help me fund a sanctuary for whistleblowers who come from countries not like mine, not a rich country, but for countries like yours, which and lots of other countries where whistleblower protections and anti-corruption activists are subject to really dire consequences for their actions. That includes journalists. And to when they're facing the worst of it, to be able to recognize them internationally, extract them from their dire circumstances, put them in a sanctuary, in a location that I'm trying to figure out, probably somewhere in the United States, for a year or two, with financial support for them and their families, a link to established institutions, academic institutions, where they can recover, regenerate, and retrain themselves, and then re-enter the fray, which I'm calling the Integrity Sanctuary. I'm getting a lot of support for this, as I said. Kind of surprisingly, even from the Trump administration, given their history, but from them too. And I see it as a go, beginning sometime late next year. So, Frank's popped up. I'm winding up. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to take your questions.
Jim, thank you very much. That was right to the point, because you highlighted, I think, something that Professor Ida Chaba was talking about, obviously, is the media's ability to do damage, but then also what Fisayo and Anthony were speaking about as well, the crucial role that the media play in highlighting the kind of court case you had going on with the UN Secretary General. we're getting questions in the chat. Thank you very much. And we've got about 25 more minutes left in our session. I want to allow a chance for the panelists to answer the questions, but of course we have two more panelists. So with the same rule in place that you have about 5 minutes to speak, I wanted to introduce Agata Amata, who I had the pleasure of speaking with over the weekend, and given her lively speaking style and nimble mind, I'm looking forward to hearing from her. To give you a little background, for those of you in Nigeria, I'm sure you know her talk show, Inside Out with Agata, and Inside Out Extra, two popular television shows. She's also the managing director of Inside Out Media that was established back in 1997. And that's a media consultancy, broadcast, and production company based in Lagos that gave birth to Rave TV, Trend FM 100.9, and Rave Films. She's also an active member of the Electronic Media Content Owners Association, the Central Working Committee of Broadcasting Organizations, and Women in Management, Business, and Public Service. So with that, I'll turn the microphone over to Agata, and when you see my face, that'll be a time up for you. You'll have a bit more to speak, but we'll wrap things up so we can get to our final speaker, Azuka Agagua. Agata?
Yeah, thank you very much, Frank. Thank you for having me, and hello to all the other panelists. Prof, I salute. Yeah, let me just first of all start by saying that there's a few things I've heard, in line, but some I disagree with. First of all, I think that we underrate the ability of the viewer to figure out the truth. We sort of think that they swallow everything we tell them hook, line, and sinker. Having dealt with issues for as long as I've dealt with it, for over 20 years, talking to everyday Nigerians, I find out that most of the time they really do understand what's going on. They might not know the full details, but every Nigerian has an idea of what is happening. I also don't believe that there's a crisis of talent, Fisayo. You are an example of the fact that there isn't. The truth of the matter is that most hardworking Nigerians who want to take time to do things, and I also speak as one of them, get very discouraged by the system. After you have done all the work you have done, what change has occurred? Instead, you were thrown in jail. If you had the opportunity to use that time that you spent, would you do it again, knowing that the government that you thought would appreciate your effort actually ended up throwing you in jail and persecuting you? That's the question. So you get a lot of young minds who have so much that they want to do, discouraged by a system that stifles. And therein lies the problem. I think that, and I'm going to come to NBC. It's funny that our government officials think it is okay to talk to foreign press and are ready to take on any question. I saw the governor of Lagos State on CNN ask the direct question that he would not answer on Arise TV, and he had to answer it. I think that we, the Nigerian press, have been undermined by rules, by regulations, and by government. It is not because we can't do what it takes. So I was watching a TV channel and President Trump was on live and he was talking about the elections being rigged and he was just going on and on. And you know what the channel did? They took him off and they apologized to us and said, we're sorry, we cannot continue with that because everything he's saying does not have any merit. He has no proof, and we cannot allow that go on our channel. And when I watched that, I thought to myself, any station does this, they will be slammed. Imagine President Buhari is talking. Even our Minister for Information, imagine what he was saying. And I decided that, you know what, this we all know what happened at Lekki and all of that, and this cannot be true, and we take him off. Prof will shut me down. That's the truth. That's the truth. My license will be revoked. My staff will be out of work. NBC is jury, judge, everything. As soon as they tell me I've done wrong, they will fine me. I have to pay. I mean, so when you look at all these situations, as a broadcaster, as a journalist, you ask yourself, what am I doing all this for? I was dealing with my program Inside Out for over 20 years, and I know how many issues I've dealt with. I know the amount of stress I got into with several governments who thought I was being sponsored. And the fact that when you seem to say anything against government, it is considered, I mean, that's a new word, even children know it now, hate speech. It's ridiculous. Because we're supposed to be independent. What reason would I have? What would I stand to gain from wanting to bring down a government? How does it help me as a journalist? Why is it perceived that every time you do something that is not praise singing or in consonant with what the government thinks that they want to hear, you are working for somebody? I find that amazing. And these, for me, are the fundamental issues. The fact that people now see, I mean, when everybody saw their rise and the people, I mean, just go on Twitter and get the pulse of the people. You don't even need to ask what they thought of that coverage. And then you have that going on and you are watching an NTA and they're showing you the streets of Lagos very peaceful. Who are we fooling? Who really are we fooling? The truth of the matter, as far as I'm concerned, is that I think that we have to be allowed to operate as the fortress state that we're supposed to be. We have to be allowed to be independent. If NBC has a problem with something that the station, I don't think they have the right to take us to court. Bring your case, let's bring our case. You cannot be the regulator, you cannot, I was very happy personally when AIT took NBC to court. I think things like this need to start to happen if this country is going to grow. I think people need to start to challenge the status quo. Okay, I can see your face, Frank, and so I'm going to leave. Here's what I think. I essentially think that we need to be more independent as a body and be allowed to do our job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agata. And I have to say, so I'm speaking to you about 16 kilometers from the White House. I live just outside Washington. And so your point to the decision by media in the US to make it very clear when political leaders were speaking the truth and not speaking the truth and using that sort of discretion that they've in the past rarely used was vital in what appears will be a democratic transition of power in the US. But that would have been under threat if media organizations had not done that, right? If they'd done what they traditionally do, was just report what people say. But they exercise this discretion and this power. And because of that, the occupant of the house 16 kilometers from my house will be departing soon.
But they needed a big kick in the butt to do that.
Okay. So yeah, and so I think that really highlights how discretion is, and sort of unwritten rules and traditions and understandings and trust are so important to the relationship that Professor Armstrong Adichaba was highlighting. But before we get into a discussion, we've got some questions, but unfortunately not too much time. I wanted to turn the microphone over to the person who's going to remind us why we're all here, which is about corruption. And that's Mrs. Azuka Agugua, and she's the acting head of Public Enlightenment Department and the spokesperson to the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offenses Commission in Nigeria. She formerly was with the Education Department of ICPC. She holds a bachelor's in education biology and marketing and public relations. She has a master's. She's also the chief spokesperson for the ICPC. So with that, Azuka, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. And again, when you see my face, it's time to wrap up. And we'll have about 10 minutes, I hope, for questions at the end of this session. Azuka?
Thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure seeing you again and talking to this panel. I thank everybody for their contributions so far. and I've taken notes of most of what I have to say has been said by others. But I just want to touch on one or two things that were raised by other panelists and put the ICPC spin on it. The media has a good and a major role to play in fighting corruption and enthroning good governance beyond just reporting what has happened, reporting activities. And so many things have been said about monitoring, exposing corruption, monitoring projects. I want to talk about one thing. The media needs to partner with governments, not just to fight corruption, that is remove the negative, but also to enforce and entrench the positive, enforce behavioral change and positive values. That is one major role that I don't think we are getting. And that is what ICPC always needs the media to join us to do. The fact of the matter is you can't just keep telling people, don't be corrupt, don't do this, don't do that. You need to tell them, this is what we need you to be doing. This is when the media is monitoring corruption, monitoring projects, they should also try to push citizens in that same direction. Then secondly, talking about what our own personal experience, we work a lot with the media. I mean, just last week, we had 2 media roundtables in Abuja and Lagos, talking with the media about our recent initiatives, especially the National Ethics and Integrity Policy, which was passed by the government. And we were just trying to say, help us to push this out in the public, that we have this policy and this is what we are trying to achieve by it. We want citizens not just to shun corruption, which is evil, we want them to imbibe these positive values in their daily lives. And we got them together, we got online publishers, we got the Nigerian Guild of Editors, we got so many other people on board, media executives, to say partner with the commission. And to partner is not just to carry our news. Again, once again, I'm just emphasizing that there is the partnership in helping to step down information to the public. Yes, the social media has its limitations and we have our challenges with the media. We have our challenges when it comes to enforcement. The media see us as people who have only one mandate, enforcement. They see all anti-corruption agencies as those that should just be arresting and prosecuting, and that is their work. So any other work we do is not as important. So when they get overly interested in our enforcement work, and many times people tell us, oh, don't conduct media trials. ICPC and I believe other anti-corruption agencies don't go out of their way to conduct media trials. What happens is that sometimes we see this eagerness to break the news. And so that, we get bombarded, we get badged with questions. What is happening about this case? What about this case? What about this case? And that might interfere. Revealing details about an ongoing case might interfere with the process of investigation and actually conducting the case. So we are like partner with us on areas that we can easily move along. Partner with us in tracking projects, and we are partnering with a lot of media. I'm very pleased to announce that we are partnering with a lot of media organizations when it comes to constituency projects tracking. We are making information available to them because that's one area the media, one area they need. They need information. They need information on the projects. They need information about releases, financial releases. So if we make this information available, they can follow and partner on that. And with that alone, they can lead ICPC, point us to the right track to actually carry out enforcement activities. So we need the partnership, we need the media to understand us, to understand what we do, our 3-pronged mandate, the prevention aspects that we do, the policy, the work we do among the MDAs, because the MDAs, when we talk public sector in all ramifications, something has to be done. But what has to be done is that you have to examine the systems in place. We can't arrest everybody in the public sector. So we need to put systems in place. And when we do this, we want the media to amplify it, to tell people this is what we are doing, to take the ethics and compliance scorecard we have done of MDAs, saying those that are high risk, why they are high risk, amplify this, analyze this, and share with the public. Not just to say, oh, they haven't arrested anybody. Well, the arrests are ongoing. We are doing that. The investigations are ongoing, the cases are ongoing, but that is not all we do. So we need them to understand this and have a robust relationship to partner on all fronts on what we do. When I had a chat with Frank, he raised the issue of, are there limits to press freedom? I said, yes, there are limits to press freedom. There is always a limit to any freedom. Your freedom can only continue as much as it doesn't infringe on my own freedom. So, but press freedom, shouldn't they know everything? So there are some limits, and that is where this issue of national security comes in, you know. But like Agatha said, I don't believe, and we don't in ICPC believe, that the media is out to pull down the government. The media is out to do a good job. They are out to expose what is really happening. But then there's a thin line between doing that good job and national security, and also interfering in some processes. And sometimes we get like subtle threats that, oh, if you people don't give us this information, we are going to do this. And I think that's what government opposes, when they feel that, oh, the media is trying to interfere and threaten government, we are going to expose you, we are going to do a big reveal. Well, go ahead and reveal. That would be interesting to know. There's no need to threaten. Give us this information or we do a big reveal. These are some of the scenarios that we grapple with here in ICP. I think I can hear Frank's voice.
Okay. Azuka, thank you so much. And I think this is a great way to end the sort of formal presentations of the panel, because what you're talking about, the education of the young, positive values, partnering with the ICPC, it immediately brings to mind the work in Indonesia of what, to my mind, is the second most powerful anti-corruption agency in the world, after the one in Hong Kong, the KPK, the Commission for the Eradication of Corruption. So that's an environment where that institution, the KPK, has done education and instilled positive values to the point that when that KPK's existence has been threatened by Parliament wanting to cut funding, people take to the streets and create a human wall around the KPK building to defend it. I mean, that's the sort of loyalty and importance that the Anti-Corruption Commission in Indonesia has. And I think, Azuka, if things progress the way you're talking, that could be the situation in Nigeria as well. It's very difficult to achieve that. Journalists are an essential part of that. But the situation in Indonesia is proof of it. We have a little less than 10 minutes to wrap up to take questions. So I think perhaps the most efficient and fair way to do this is to pose one question that Lola Adekanye, my colleague who helped organize this project, the conference, put forward, and give everybody about a minute to answer. And we'll go in the order that folks presented. So it'll be Armstrong, Anthony, Jim, Agatha, Azuka. And the question is, how can citizens support independent and professional journalism? So everybody has about a minute, and same thing, when you see my face, it's time to wrap up. Professor, if you don't mind being first, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right, thank you again, Frank Brown. And let me say this has been a very interesting and rewarding time. The need for professionalism, ethical standards, and strict adherence to rules and regulations remain very key. Let me quickly inform Agatha and everybody who's been listening that fairness is cardinal at all points. You've made a very good point about broadcasters in America that are able to yank off people who are making unsubstantiated, inaccurate, and spurious comments. We expect Nigerian broadcasters like you to do same. When people are insidious, when people are deviating from the real issues and manipulating the facts, your professional ethics require that you are fair-minded, you are balanced and objective, and you are professional enough, you know, to ensure that what comes on air is factual, is accurate, believable, not just for government, but also for the individuals that you bring on your program. I wish to thank the organizers of this event and finally make the point that the Nigerian Digital Switchover project comes with a lot of wealth benefits for wealth creation. We expect to create over 4 or 5 million jobs. Opportunities are created in terms of digital infrastructure plays. And like we said, we'll be making set-top boxes. The industries are coming to Lagos. And then content producers like Agatha are already cashing in on the advantage of the DSO. We're enjoying many more journalists and broadcasters to do so. Thank you very much, Brown, and good time to everybody.
Thanks, Professor Idechaba. Thank you very much. So, Anthony, you're next up. The question is, how can citizens support independent and professional journalism? Anthony from Bloomberg.
Okay, yeah. I think we must realize that independent and professional journalism is very vital to any society's existence. And for citizens, I think the easiest way is to be ready to pay for news, because that's what supports the continuous publication of that newspaper. But I think more important, I realize that most citizens are challenged. Nigeria is said to be, we have a high number of poor people. So people are challenged to be able to afford the news. So that's where I would say those who can afford it should come in. We have people who can afford it and they can set up grants. Grants and foundations for good causes are not very popular in this part of the world, but I'll use this opportunity to call on individuals who can afford it to set up grants and use those grants to support good journalism. It's good for everybody. Good journalism is good for everybody. Support journalists to be able to do independent and professional work in the society. That's the way we will develop. That's the only way we can develop if we are able to do that over a longer period of time. Yeah.
Anthony, thank you. And next we go to Jim, the whistleblower. How can citizens support independent and professional journalism?
I unfortunately won't be able to speak very much about the Nigerian context because I don't really know it, to be honest. But one thing I do know is the power of civic mobilization, because that is in fact what has been extremely effective in fighting corruption. Frank has mentioned about the KPK, but it is probably one of the most, if not the most effective way of addressing corruption and protecting individuals who are seen as champions of anti-corruption, which to my mind would include journalists, at least good ones, the independent and professional ones that are the subject of this question. So if journalists are under siege or under attack, they are some of the most powerful at getting their message out and mobilizing the public to come out physically in their support.
Jim, thank you. Agatha? Oh, I think you're muted, Agatha.
So I think Jim just took the words right out of my mouth. I think there's a need for citizens to be more involved, to stand up. I mean, I've seen a bit of that happen with the NSAS protest, where they got out and talked about the people who had been picked up and arrested and made a lot of noise, just to help ensure that people who come out as journalists, broadcasters, who come out to speak the truth, get some form of backing and protection. I mean, in the kind of environment we operate in, numbers count. When everybody's making noise about the same thing, the government has no choice but to listen. Without that, a lot of journalists and press people are going to end up suffering. I mean, that was how we heard about the person who was locked up in, I think it was Calabar and all of that. So citizens must be involved and they must be aware and they must be willing to come out and support. I think that's the best they can do.
Azuka, you're next up.
Okay, thank you. I think we can support professionalism and independence of the media. I mean, there are several ways. What most obvious is be open. We as government should be open with information. I thank God for the FOI bill act. I don't know whether it's being used enough by the media. I don't think so. I think they don't mostly use it because most times government is not responsive, but there is a measure for asking for that information and getting, I mean, if they don't release it, you can always complain. And then I think also for us as a government agency, we take the media along with us in our project so they see what we do. But we can't take them along for sensitive activities. We take them along for what we do. And the obvious one, which is if we want them to have funding, is to channel our adverts to them. That is very important, because we always get such a request that we should send adverts to them to at least give them some funding. It helps them to stay alive, to stay up. So that's just one.
Thank you, Azuka. That comes back to Anthony's point about the sort of conflict of interest, I guess, but that would be a whole nother panel discussion. So I think we'll give the last word to Fisayo. He was the first and he'll be the last. And we'll give him a somewhat different question given his standing. So Fisayo, the question to you from Lola again is, what sort of policies or government interventions are needed to protect and maintain the independence of journalism when they cover public interest issues? Fisayo?
Yes, thank you. I think policy is even stretching it too far. Just the willpower. One, allow journalists, independent investigative journalists, to do their job. I know an investigative outfit that has been trying to register with the CAC since forever, and it just wouldn't sail through, simply because of the proponents. Clear cut, the lawyer registering them has registered so many others. You know, they took forever to grant them registration, and since August, the certificate is nowhere. They can't open an account, they can't open a company, they can't do anything. Just give them the space to operate, because if you say you want to fight corruption, it's not unidirectional. It's not only government that can fight corruption. The media can fight corruption too. And if independent people want to do it, give them the space to operate. Samuel Ogutiko of Fremont Times was arrested in 2018. What was his offense? He published a story, an exclusive about the possible role of the DSS-DG in the siege to the National Assembly. And guess what? When he was arrested, the initial stages, they accused him of breaking into the IGP's office. You know, fantastic that a journalist broke into the office of the IGP. Otherwise, he would never have had access to that document. Give journalists the space to do their job. You have the FOI, Freedom of Information Bill. I'm happy that the ICPC spokesperson mentioned it. You have the Freedom of Information signed by the executive, not at gunpoint. It passed through all processes, but the government is not respecting it. 7 days, give journalists what they want. The court has not prosecuted one person for disrespecting that act. And journalists use it from time to time without getting results. How can the government make the law and also be the ones to break it? So it's all in the court of the government.
Fisayo, thank you very much for ending this session, this panel discussion in a very practical way that brings us back to the very basic needs of journalists, the role of government. We need to wrap up because we're going to be transported back to the main session. I wanted to say thank you to all the panelists, everybody who took the time to prepare and speak, and especially for the work you do, the bravery, the courage, the intelligence, the subtlety that you bring to this work, which is vital. It's been a pleasure for me to talk about my two favorite subjects, anti-corruption and journalism, free press. So it's been an honor to be with you. I hope we stay in touch. And with that, I'm going to be quiet and we'll be transported to the main session, I hope.
And the advisory board of the University of Buckingham Center for Extractive Studies. He is a past board member of ICO Insurance PLC, GTL Registrars, and Conoco Phillips, amongst others. Otumba Ogunbanjo is a member of the International Bar Association, Nigerian Bar Association, Institute of Directors, Institute of Petroleum UK, and a registered capital market consultant with the Securities and Exchange Commission, Nigeria. Otumba Ogunbanjo acquired his first degree in business administration with honors, from the prestigious American College of Switzerland, whereafter he joined Chase Merchant Bank and worked as a credit analyst under the guided tutelage of late Mr. Tayo Adeniroku, the co-founder of Guarantee Trust Bank. He proceeded to the University of Buckingham, where he obtained his law degree. He was called to the Nigerian bar in 1990. He attended the New York Institute of Finance, where he obtained his International Capital Markets Certificate. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me, make welcome, as we invite Otumba Abimbola Ogunbanjo to give us a call to action for day 2 of the APEC 2020.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me first of all confirm that I can be seen and I can be heard. Can I be seen and I can be heard?
We can hear you, sir.
You can see me?
You need to activate your video.
Just a
Please
minute.
activate the video.
Just a minute. Is it on now?
Not yet, sir.
Oh,
it's on. Okay.
It's on.
So let's have it on the screen, on the large screen, please.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, distinguished speakers and participants. Permit me to rest on established protocols in the interest of time. I must say that the theme of the conference has come at a very opportune time when countries face undeniable emergencies, concentration of power.
I beg to interrupt you, sir. Can you please click to activate your video? I can see your screen now, but your video seems to be locked. So just unlock the video so that we can see you, sir. Sorry to interrupt. On the lower left button of your screen. Oh, beautiful. There you go, sir. We can see you now.
Okay.
So please go ahead, sir.
Okay. I must say that the theme of the conference has come at a very opportune time when countries face undeniable emergencies, concentration of power, derogation of rights and freedoms, as exemplified by the crackdown on the NSAS protests, and as large amounts of money are infused into global economies to alleviate the COVID-19 crisis. The politicization of the distribution of government palliatives readily comes to mind. The desperation and urgency of the global health crisis means that ordinary rules and processes are necessarily subordinate within reason to the need to preserve life and to contribute to the efforts of fighting the spread of the virus. Perhaps inevitably, crises such as this one present a fantastic opportunity for dishonest players to take advantage of the chaos and relaxation of the usual protocols, fueled by an unprecedented level of government spending in order to temper the effects of millions of job losses as a global economic depression looms. I certainly have been enriched by the expert insights that have been shared over the course of this event, and I hope it will inspire us to develop innovative business solutions to champion economic inclusion, tackle corruption, and improve transparency in the socio-economic landscape of Nigeria. I warmly salute and give kudos to all the speakers for the discussions across all the three panels. Turning to today's discussions, we've heard from the expert panelists about the impact of corruption on the engine of growth in Africa, the MSMEs. The panelists have highlighted the key role played by the SME sector globally and in Nigeria. According to the World Bank, SMEs represent about 90% of businesses and more than 50% of employment worldwide. In Nigeria, SMEs contribute 48% of national GDP and account for 96% of businesses and 84% of employment. The panelists have also discussed the challenges faced by the SME sector in detail. Small business owners and entrepreneurs throughout the country disproportionately bear the cost of corruption directly and indirectly due to a broken social welfare system and a bureaucratic regulatory environment that is unable to deliver on the promises of otherwise well-articulated policy interventions. We have also had insightful deliberations on the opportunities press freedoms and an empowered media can play in tackling corruption and strengthening accountability in Nigeria. Our expert panelists also highlighted the challenges presented by a combination of increased security weak institutional safeguards, lack of resources, and declining support for press freedoms for the Nigerian economy. They stressed on the role of the media as an essential part of civic engagement, serving as a primary watchdog to expose corruption and enhance accountability. It was particularly interesting to learn about the opportunities that technology can present in the fight against corruption. Our experts discussed on how advanced technology could be used to mitigate corruption and improve transparency. More importantly, they have shared elaborate insights on how businesses can take the lead in advancing economic inclusion by heralding transparency in their business practices. They have pointed us to one underlying theme: the issue of corruption is biting hard on our socioeconomic framework as a nation, and it can no longer be business as usual. Anti-corruption and good governance are fundamental pillars of a sustainable and inclusive global economy. According to the 2020 report released by Transparency International, Nigeria is now ranked 146 out of the 196 countries considered in the Corruption Perception Index, 2 steps lower than its ranking of 144 in 2018. The report is indeed worrisome when you realize that other African countries are more decisive in their fight against corruption. Nigeria ranks behind countries like Botswana, who is 34, Rwanda, who is 51, and Mauritius, which is 56, amongst other African nations. Like the popular saying goes, the darkest part of the night ushers in the dawn. Nigeria is perhaps at the lowest point. The only way for us now is up. In calling the stakeholders to action, the organizers of this event have tasked me to make the call to action to the various stakeholder groups in the context of the topics the speakers have just presented. If there is anything that we can all agree on from these sessions, it is the fact that we all have a significant role to play in achieving economic inclusion through viable business-led solutions. It has been particularly interesting to learn of the advances achieved by business-led solutions such as Budge IT and Accountability Lab that have leveraged technology to improve transparency and accountability in government finances. As individuals, we must continue to cherish and promote responsible behavior, integrity in both of personal and corporate life. Let me now turn to the various stakeholder groups, starting with the government and the public sector. Through the anti-corruption call to action of the United Nations Global Compact, the United Nations calls on governments to implement the UN Convention Against Corruption by strengthening anti-corruption policies, laws, and enforcement mechanisms to create a level playing field and incentivize good behavior. Government at all levels must prioritize the prosperity of the private and public sector, especially the SMEs. However, the government comprises of all of us, and we must utilize our democratically provisioned tools to fight corruption through our one individual votes. I turn to private enterprise, to which I champion. The fight against corruption in corporate organizations is at the heart of good corporate governance, which is primarily the task of company boards to supervise. The Nigerian Code of Conduct allocates the responsibility of establishing policies and practices that addresses issues relating to good ethical conduct and corruption. Boards are equally tasked with the responsibility of monitoring the implementation of the practices and policies to ensure compliance. Shareholders equally have a critical role in ensuring good corporate governance in companies that they have interest in. The shareholders' role in governance has traditionally been to appoint the directors and the auditors and to satisfy themselves that appropriate governance structures are in place. However, the trend of active participation by investor groups in ensuring effective management of environmental, social, and governance issues is on the increase. I hereby call on directors to implement appropriate policies and on investors to make the most of their voting rights to ensure effective corporate governance that promotes transparency is enforced in private enterprise. By publicly sharing their anti-corruption policies, companies can demonstrate leadership in the drive against anti-corruption, and I encourage boards to adopt this practice. Turning to the organized private sector, which is led by the LCCI, the need to develop and promote strong institutions that promote accountability through partnerships is enshrined in Sustainable Development Goals 16 and 17. By making public commitments to industry-wide collaborative platforms, such as the United Nations GC 10 principles, or making donations to support pro-transparency initiatives like Transparency International, the organized private sector can come together to demonstrate leadership in the drive against anti-corruption. The Nigerian Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Rating System is a tool that the NSC deploys to test the readiness of directors to tackle key ethical and governance issues. I charge listed companies to ensure that they readily meet the criteria of this CGRS. With regards to the civil society plays a critical role in fighting corruption. Their functions produce a double impact by influencing both public and private sector to create suitable and implement suitable policies while acting as a watchdog to raise public awareness on cases of non-compliance. It is particularly important for the civil society organizations in this space to maintain their independence whilst ensuring that their voices are heard. In conclusion, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we all have a role to play in making Nigeria a corrupt-free nation for the good of future generations. I thank you most warmly for your attention. God bless and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Otumba Abimbola Ogubanjo, President of the National Council of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. That was a very, very, very beautiful call to action. And from the way you spoke, it shows the passion that you have towards the subject matter that has been discussed so far since yesterday and of course today. We say thank you to you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the final stretch of today's event, day 2 of ABEC 2020. Let me quickly announce that a quick update. 14 companies entered for the ABEC Ambassador Challenge which, for this year, and some of them have submitted their required documents for screening, and the finalists will be announced tomorrow. And not to forget the fact too that for the 3-minute pitch challenge, almost 100 entries was received. In short, a total of 83, almost 100 was received. Individuals and organizations were invited to submit innovative ideas about how to tackle corruption in Nigeria. The 3-minute pitch explains the initiative and could be accompanied with a more detailed pitch. Now, 5 winners will emerge and they will be announced tomorrow. So you don't want to miss tomorrow's event, as the 5 winners will be announced, and also the APEC Ambassador Challenge winners too will also be announced. What a day it has been, day 2 of ABEC 2020. And just like yesterday, day 1, I did tell you from the very beginning that nothing will be left untouched. Everything was touched today. And we want to say a very big thank you to all the wonderful speakers and panelists that graced today's occasion. We want to say a very, very big thank you to all of you. And also to remind all of you that tomorrow's event is equally packed full. We're still going to have several plenary sessions tomorrow. And as I did mention, we'll be announcing the winners for the ABEC Challenge and the 3-minute speech, which will be very interesting too, because these winners will be individuals that have come up with practical solutions as to ways we can tackle the issue of corruption here in Nigeria. There's a minute. So I've just been giving a bit of correction that tomorrow we're just going to be having plenaries, just plenaries for tomorrow, and of course the mentioning of the winners of the 3-minute pitch, and of course the ABEC Ambassador Challenge. So once more, I want to say a special thank you to all our speakers today, all our notable speakers who graced today's occasion. From our keynote speaker in person of Professor Kingsley Mogalu, who joined us all the way. We want to say thank you, sir, for making our time to be part of this. And we also want to thank the DG of LCCI in person of Mr. Muda Yusuf for being part of that earlier Q&A and plenary that we had. And also thank Mrs. Omaomi Badamose, the country manager of SIPE, for being part of that plenary session. And also, as I did mention earlier, all the panelists from the various sessions, the one that happened live here and the other two that happened online. We want to say thank you and thank you all for being part of it. So please, as we draw the curtain to today, we say go take a rest and make it a date to be part of tomorrow's edition, which will start at about 11:45 a.m. Nigerian time. We'll start playing some of the highlight videos that we've been doing since the past, since yesterday. Then by 12 on the dot, we'll have the opening and the voting for the APEC ambassadors. Then we'll have the three-part video that I mentioned at day one. The third part will air tomorrow, so you don't want to miss that. And of course, we'll now have all the various plenaries for tomorrow before we draw the final curtain for tomorrow's event. So ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizers of this event, LCCI, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the foremost chamber in Africa, and of course, SIPE, we want to say thank you once more for being part of today's event, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I've been your host, William Tuzumba. See you tomorrow.
Big corruption scandals involving companies like Airbus, Ericsson, or Odebrecht have dominated the headlines in recent years. These aren't the first private companies making millions in profits abroad, thanks to their ability to offer bribes in exchange for lucrative business deals. Unfortunately, it's all too common for businesses in wealthy countries to export corruption to poorer countries, and no country is immune. Countries receiving foreign bribes often pay higher prices than they otherwise would for lower quality goods and services. Spending taxpayer money on unnecessary contracts wastes millions of dollars that could otherwise go towards essential and often life-saving services like healthcare and education. Equally troubling, foreign bribery damages the reputation of the affected country and the trust in its government, which once lost is hard to rebuild. According to our latest exporting corruption report, nearly half of world exports come from countries that fail to punish foreign bribery. Countries must do more to stop foreign bribery, especially those that are the biggest traders but the worst enforcers of the rules. Learn more. www.transparency.org.
For many citizens of African countries, paying bribes to officials for simple services like passports or driving licenses is all too common. Many even need to pay bribes just to file a complaint with the police. In fact, our research shows that 1 in 4 African citizens are forced to pay bribes for these and many other basic services, including life-saving medicines and healthcare. Over the last 2 years, more than 47,000 citizens from 35 African countries shared their everyday experiences of corruption with us. What did they say? Well, more than half of citizens think corruption is getting worse in their country, and their government is doing a bad job in tackling it. Corruption, though, doesn't affect everyone equally. The poorest in society are twice as likely to pay bribes than the wealthiest, and young people are more likely to pay bribes than older people. But corruption and bribery in Africa don't exist in a vacuum. Foreign governments and companies have a role to play, ensuring that cases, bribery, and money laundering in African countries are investigated and punished. The good news? A majority of people are optimistic they can still make a real difference in the fight against corruption. Learn more about the 2019 Global Corruption Barometer for Africa at www.transparency.org/GCB10/Africa.
Big corruption scandals involving companies like Airbus, Ericsson, or Odebrecht have dominated the headlines in recent years. These aren't the first private companies making millions in profits abroad, thanks to their ability to offer bribes in exchange for lucrative business deals. Unfortunately, it's all too common for businesses in wealthy countries to export corruption to poorer countries, and no country is immune. Countries receiving foreign bribes often pay higher prices than they otherwise would for lower quality goods and services. Spending taxpayer money on unnecessary contracts wastes millions of dollars that could otherwise go towards essential and often life-saving services like healthcare and education. Equally troubling, foreign bribery damages the reputation of the affected country and the trust in its government, which once lost is hard to rebuild. According to our latest exporting corruption report, nearly half of world exports come from countries that fail to punish foreign bribery. Countries must do more to stop foreign bribery, especially those that are the biggest traders but the worst enforcers of the rules. Learn more. www.transparency.org.